In the profound and silent blackness, a faint shimmer of stardust began to coalesce, drawn together by the invisible hand of gravity. This was the birth of Earth, a chaotic swirl of cosmic debris orbiting a young and tempestuous sun. For eons, the nascent planet was a hellish sphere of molten rock, bombarded relentlessly by asteroids and comets that delivered both destruction and the essential ingredients for future oceans. The sky was a perpetual furnace, glowing with the light of frequent impacts, and the air was a toxic brew of hydrogen, helium, and volcanic gases, utterly inhospitable. Gradually, the furious pace of creation slowed. The planet's surface began to cool, its outer layer crusting over into a thin, brittle shell fractured by titanic forces from within. Volcanoes pierced this new skin, vomiting forth lava that flowed in incandescent rivers, solidifying into vast, dark plains of basalt. The relentless bombardment from space lessened, and the atmosphere began to settle, though it remained a thick, opaque shroud, holding in the intense heat from the planet's violent formation. Then came the rains. For millions of years they fell, a deluge of epic proportions that cooled the steaming rock and began to fill the great low basins and chasms that scarred the young world. These were the first oceans, shallow, warm, and acidic, constantly churned by a nearby moon whose gravitational pull was far stronger than it is today. The water, brown and murky with dissolved minerals and sediment, covered much of the globe under a sky that was now a perpetual, gloomy twilight. The furious orange of the young sun filtered through a dense canopy of clouds. The landscape was one of stark, terrifying beauty. Lava fields stretched to horizons broken only by the jagged peaks of new mountain ranges thrust upward by the planet's restless tectonic heart. There were no colors of life, no green, no blue sky, only the grays of rock, the black of fresh basalt, the deep rust red of iron-rich land, and the constant roiling steam from geysers and hot springs. The only sound was the groan of the planet itself, the rumble of earthquakes, the hiss of steam, the crash of waves against barren stone shores, and the constant drumming of rain on a world that waited, in a deep and primordial hush, for the first whisper of something new. In the warm, shadowy depths of the young oceans, a miracle was brewing in the silence. The primordial seas, once a sterile chemical soup, began to stir with a new kind of agitation. It was not the churn of tides or the belch of hydrothermal vents, but a subtle, internal quickening. From the complex dance of amino acids and nucleotides, spurred by lightning and ultraviolet light, the first fragile structures of life emerged. They were not creatures as one might imagine, but microscopic bubbles of chemistry, simple membranes enclosing a spark of self-replication. These were the pioneers, the prokaryotes, drifting as invisible specks in the vast sunlit waters near the surface, feeding on the organic molecules that had accumulated over eons. For billions of years, these simple cells were the sole tenants of Earth. They thrived in a world without oxygen, their metabolism a quiet, anaerobic process. The seas teemed with them, a hidden microbial universe. Then, a revolution began in the form of a new kind of organism. A descendant of those first pioneers learned to capture the faint light filtering down from the world above. Within their simple forms, a complex pigment evolved, a molecule of stunning elegance, chlorophyll. These cyanobacteria began to perform a feat that would forever alter the destiny of the planet. They learned to eat sunlight. The process was slow, patient, and utterly transformative. These tiny organisms consumed water and carbon dioxide and, using the sun's energy, crafted their own food. The waste product of this miraculous new recipe was a gas that was poison to most other life on the planet: oxygen. At first, the iron dissolved in the oceans greedily absorbed this new gas, rusting out and sinking to the sea floor in great banded layers that would one day become stone. But eventually, the oceans could hold no more. Oxygen began to bubble out into the water and seep into the atmosphere, a silent, creeping contamination of the ancient air. This was the first great pollution event. and it triggered a catastrophic extinction for the anaerobic life that had ruled for so long. The oxygen was a toxic, corrosive gas to them, and they died in incalculable numbers, their reign ended by the exhaust of a new, more powerful form of life. But from this disaster emerged opportunity. In the oxygen-rich waters, new, more complex cells evolved. These eukaryotes developed internal structures, a nucleus to safeguard their genetic code, and mitochondria, tiny power plants that could harness the reactive power of oxygen to produce far more energy than ever before. This energy fueled complexity, allowing cells to grow larger, to specialize, and eventually to join together. The first true multicellular life forms were humble things, soft-bodied fronds and discs that clung to the sea floor in the shallow, sun-drenched waters. They were the Ediacaran biota, strange and silent experiments in body plans, most of which would leave no descendants. But they proved that cooperation was possible. Cells could work as one, and in doing so they could build something greater than themselves. The stage was now set. The chemistry of the world forever changed. The seas were becoming oxygenated, the atmosphere slowly turning breathable. Life had taken its first gasping breath and was ready to build empires. The first tentative steps onto land were not taken by feet at all, but by roots. Along the muddy tidal fringes of the continents, where sea met stone in a perpetual brackish embrace, a new kind of life began to anchor itself. These were the pioneers of the terrestrial world, simple vascular plants that learned to draw moisture and minerals from the earth itself, their thread-like rhizoids gripping the unstable ground like desperate fingers. They were small and low, hugging the damp soil in mats of green that seemed to breathe the very air they had helped create. With no leaves to speak of, their photosynthesizing stems reached for the sun under skies that were for the first time in Earth's history, slowly clearing of their toxic haze, becoming a pale oxygen-blue dome. This greening of the continents was a silent, patient revolution. The barren rock and sediment, once sculpted only by wind and water, now hosted a living carpet that stabilized the earth, trapped moisture, and began the slow work of creating soil from stone. The air, rich with oxygen and stripped of much of its ultraviolet scattering moisture, became a new highway for life. Wingless insects, descendants of marine arthropods, were among the first animals to venture out of the water, scurrying through the primitive vegetation on countless tiny legs. Their bodies, encased in protective exoskeletons, resisted desiccation, and their simple tracheae breathed the gaseous bounty that their plant predecessors had provided. The world beyond the water's edge was a place of stark contrasts and immense opportunity. Sunlight, once filtered and diffused by fathoms of water, now fell unimpeded, fueling explosive growth. But it was also a world of harsh new dangers, the threat of drying out, the pull of gravity, and extreme temperature swings between day and night. The early colonists evolved in response, developing waxy cuticles to hold in water, internal vascular systems to pump nutrients against gravity, and complex reproductive strategies that no longer relied on the buoyancy of the sea. In the humid, swampy lowlands of the developing supercontinent, these evolutionary experiments flourished on a grand scale. Giant club mosses and horsetails, ancestors of modern diminutive forms, grew to the size of trees, their trunks rising into dense primeval forests. The air hummed with the drone of early flying insects, and the ground beneath the ferny undergrowth teemed with millipedes, scorpions, and other armored arthropods that had crawled from the sea to claim this new, empty world. They were the first lords of the land, building an ecosystem from nothing but stone, air, and light. This verdant conquest set a lavish table for the next great wave of invasion. In the shallow waters where the roots of shore plants tangled with drifting algae, vertebrates still swam. But some of these fish, armed with robust fins and primitive lungs, began to gaze at the world beyond the waterline, a world now rustling with food and devoid of large predators. The stage was meticulously prepared, the continents dressed in green, the air made breathable. All that was needed was for a brave, lobe-finned fish to haul itself onto a muddy bank, and the age of the vertebrates on land would begin. The great coal forests of the Carboniferous, with their towering scale trees and humid oxygen-rich air, began to falter. The world's climate, once uniformly warm and wet, grew more varied and severe. The vast supercontinent of Pangaea coalesced, its immense interior turning dry and seasonal, a far cry from the swampy lowlands that had dominated for so long. Glaciers advanced and retreated at the poles, locking away vast quantities of water and lowering global sea levels, stranding once submerged coastal plains and isolating populations. In this new, harsher world, the age of amphibians, so dependent on water for reproduction, began to wane. A new kind of animal was emerging, one better suited to the changing Earth. From within the ranks of the advanced amphibians, a lineage evolved that carried its water with it. These were the first true reptiles, and their revolution was contained within a single, ingenious structure, the amniotic egg. Unlike the soft, jelly-coated eggs of their ancestors that had to be laid in water, this new egg was a self-contained life support system. A tough, leathery shell protected the developing embryo from desiccation, while internal membranes provided for gas exchange and stored waste. This simple adaptation broke the final tether to the aquatic world. Reptiles could now lay their eggs on dry land, in burrows or hidden in vegetation, colonizing the arid heart of Pangaea where no amphibian could follow. These early reptiles were small, sleek creatures, often no larger than a modern lizard. They scurried through the dry leaf litter of the shrinking forests, their scaly skin a perfect barrier against moisture loss. Their legs were positioned more directly beneath their bodies than the splayed limbs of amphibians, granting them a more efficient, energy-conserving gait for life on land. Some were insectivores, their sharp teeth snapping up the abundant arthropods. Others were among the first herbivores to fully embrace a terrestrial diet, grinding tough plant material with blunt, crushing teeth. They were the new inheritors, quietly diversifying in the shadows of the fading giants. Then came the Great Dying. At the end of the Permian period, the planet convulsed in the most extreme extinction event it would ever know. Massive, prolonged volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia poured unimaginable quantities of lava and gas into the atmosphere, triggering a catastrophic cascade of climate change. Global temperatures soared, oxygen levels plummeted in the oceans, and acid rain scoured the landscapes. Over 90% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate families were utterly obliterated. The lush world of the early Permian was replaced by a silent, reeking wasteland. But in the ashes, the reptiles endured. Their efficient metabolism, their ability to thrive in arid conditions, and their terrestrial reproduction became the keys to survival. While other lineages perished, the reptiles found themselves in an empty world, a blank slate of ecological opportunity. They were the hardy few who had weathered the storm, and as the planet slowly began to recover, they were poised to explode into a radiation of forms that would dominate the Earth for the next 180 million years. The age of reptiles had not just dawned, it had survived its baptism of fire and was ready to rule. From the desolate silence left by the Great Dying, life began its slow, stubborn return. The world of the early Triassic was a stark and wounded place, its skies still hazy with volcanic dust, its continents largely barren deserts where the wind whispered over bones not yet turned to stone. But in the river valleys and along the receding shorelines, green once again asserted itself. Hardy ferns and cycads pushed through the ash-choked soil, and conifers began to dot the hillsides, their somber greens a promise of recovery. It was in this raw, simplified world that a new dynasty took its first tentative steps. They were not yet the thunderous giants of later ages, but small, nimble creatures that darted through the undergrowth on long, slender legs. These were the first dinosaurs, no larger than a turkey or a dog, their bodies built for speed and agility. They moved with a purposeful grace that set them apart from the more sprawling, heavier-built reptiles that still dominated the landscape. Their hind limbs were straight and powerful, positioned directly beneath their bodies in a revolutionary upright posture that allowed for efficient, two-legged running. This was a design for endurance, for pursuit, for a new way of life in a world hungry for new forms. The world they inherited was still very much a realm of other reptiles, hulking, barrel-bodied dinosaurs, distant relatives of mammals, grubbed for roots in the floodplains with their beaked jaws. Crocodile-like phytosaurs lurked in the rivers, their eyes and nostrils raised on bony crests to watch for prey, while the rest of their bodies remained submerged. And in the skies, the first pterosaurs, leathery-winged and delicate, took to the air on membranes stretched from an elongated finger, casting fleeting shadows on the ground below. It was a world of strange and often monstrous forms, a chaotic menagerie of survivors and new experiments. The early dinosaurs were but minor players in this drama, occupying the ecological margins. They were likely opportunistic feeders, preying on insects, small vertebrates, and scavenging carcasses, using their speed to avoid the larger, more dangerous inhabitants of the Triassic. Their advantage lay not in size or strength, but in their potential, the efficiency of their gait, their likely higher metabolism, and their increasingly complex social behaviors, hinted at by fossil trackways showing groups moving together, were the seeds of future dominance. As the Triassic period wore on, the planet continued to heal. The supercontinent of Pangaea began to show its first faint cracks, and the climate grew warmer and more humid. Forests thickened, and the empty niches left by the Permian extinction yawned wider, inviting colonization. The dinosaurs, once skittish shadows at the edge of the food web, began to diversify. Some lineages grew larger, experimenting with bulk and herbivory, while others refined their roles as predators. They were biding their time, evolving in the shadows of the ruling archosaurs and synapsids, waiting for their moment. The stage was set for a takeover, and the first actors had already taken their places, small and quick, holding the blueprint for a reign that would shake the earth. The world was changing, and with it, the rules of survival. The humid greenhouse climate of the late Triassic gave way to a drier, more seasonal world, where the ability to travel far for food and to reach the highest, untouched foliage became paramount. In this new landscape, size was no longer a liability but a profound advantage. The first stirrings of gigantism began not with a roar, but with a slow, deliberate shift in posture and appetite among a lineage of once modest plant-eaters. These were the sauropodomorphs, and they were about to rewrite the very definition of what an animal could be. It started with the neck, a subtle lengthening of the vertebrae, a restructuring of the shoulders to support the new weight, an adaptation in the circulatory system to pump blood all the way to a head that was drifting ever further from the heart. The early members of this lineage, like Plateosaurus, were already impressive, standing on two powerful legs and using their long necks to browse vegetation well above the ground. But they were merely the rough draft. Evolutionary pressures, the need to access more food with less movement, to see over the newly flourishing ferns and cycads for predators, to use sheer bulk as a defense pushed the design further. Their bodies began to respond to the call of immensity. Legs thickened into pillars, feet broadened into stable platforms capable of supporting tons of living weight. The hips widened, creating a vast gut for fermenting tough plant matter, turning them into walking fermentation vats that could extract nutrients from the poorest quality foliage. Their vertebrae became lightened with air sacs, a brilliant engineering solution that allowed for immense size without crippling weight, a feature they would share with their distant bird descendants. They were becoming living mountains. The first true long-necked giants, creatures like the early Jurassic Baroposaurus, began to appear. They moved through the river valleys and floodplains in small groups, their footsteps no longer the light patter of their ancestors but deep, resonant thuds that traveled through the earth. Their necks, now truly elongated, swept over the landscape like the masts of great ships, their small heads methodically stripping branches of their leaves with peg-like teeth. They were peaceful behemoths, their world one of constant slow motion and the quiet grinding sound of digestion. This was not merely growth. It was a fundamental reimagining of animal form. The evolutionary arms race had entered a new phase, where defense was measured in feet and tons rather than teeth and claws. The predators of the world took note, evolving in turn, but they now faced a new kind of quarry, one that could not be easily brought down, one that could deliver a devastating blow with a whip of its tail or a stomp of its elephantine foot. The age of the giant had begun, and the earth would soon tremble under the weight of their passage. The great, unbroken expanse of Pangaea could no longer contain the restless energy of the planet. Deep beneath the supercontinent's crust, colossal forces strained against one another until the very skin of the earth began to tear. A slow continental unzipping commenced, a seismic sigh that would forever reshape the world. The single monolithic landmass fractured along a great north-south rift, and into this widening chasm rushed the ocean, birthing the first narrow seaway that would one day become the Atlantic. This sundering was more than a geographical event, it was an ecological catalyst, a continental divorce that would send evolution spinning off in dazzling new directions. With the fracturing of the land came a dramatic shift in global climate. The vast arid interior of Pangaea, once a single continental desert, was now broken by this new moisture-laden seaway. Ocean currents, once blocked, now began to circulate, carrying warmth and rain to lands that had known only drought. The Jurassic world grew warmer and wetter, a planet of lush, verdant growth. Dense forests of conifers, ginkgos, and tree ferns carpeted the landscapes, their canopies forming a green ceiling over a world that was rapidly filling with new and magnificent forms of life. The air itself grew thick and humid, rich with the scent of decaying vegetation and the perfume of cycads. In this newly partitioned and fertile world, the dinosaurs, no longer confined to the margins, underwent an explosive radiation. The sauropods, those long-necked giants in the making, now reached their apotheosis, evolving into true behemoths like Brachiosaurus, whose heads could graze the tops of the tallest trees. But they were no longer alone in their grandeur. A new kind of dinosaur, the stegosaurs, appeared, their backs adorned with 2 rows of enormous, diamond-shaped bony plates that may have flushed with blood for display or thermoregulation. Their tails ended in a fearsome array of sharp spikes, a thagomizer ready to defend against the era's new menace. For the predators too had evolved. The allosaurs emerged, the first of the great theropod apex predators. Larger, more powerful, and more intelligent than any Triassic hunter, they were the new lords of the Jurassic. Their massive skulls were equipped with rows of serrated, blade-like teeth, and their powerful hind legs allowed for both bursts of speed and devastating leaps. They were the nightmare made flesh, patrolling the fern-choked undergrowth and riverbanks, their presence a constant, chilling pressure that shaped the behavior and evolution of every other creature around them. And in the shadows of these titans, a quieter, more profound revolution was taking place. Among the smaller, fleet-footed theropods, a group began to experiment with a new kind of integument. Simple, hair-like filaments gave way to more complex structures, branching feathers that provided insulation. From these insulated hunters, a lineage began to explore the third dimension. Their feathered forelimbs elongated, their tails grew stiff for balance, and their bones grew lighter. They began to leap from fallen logs and low branches, at first just extending their glides, then over generations, achieving true flapping flight. They were the first birds, the Archaeopteryx and its kin, a living link between the world of dinosaurs and the sky, a promise of a future that was only just beginning to take wing. The Jurassic world was a symphony of life, a vibrant and deafening crescendo after the tentative overtures of earlier ages. Where once there had been the rustle of ferns in a near-silent wind, now the air thrummed with the drone of countless insects, the harsh cries of pterosaurs circling overhead, and the low, resonant calls of dinosaurs communicating across great distances. The land itself seemed to breathe, a living, pulsing entity of immense scale and energy. Great herds of sauropods moved like slow, grey rivers through the landscape, their passage a ground-shaking tremor that could be felt for miles. The sheer weight of their numbers carved wide highways through the forests, trails of trampled vegetation that spoke of ancient migratory routes. These forests were cathedrals of green, towering and dense. Giant sequoia-like conifers reached for the sky, their tops lost in the humid haze. Beneath them grew a lush understory of cycads with their stiff palm-like fronds, and ginkgo trees with their distinctive fan-shaped leaves fluttering in the warm breezes. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, rotting wood, and the sweet, almost pineapple-like scent of cycad cones. Everywhere, life clambered, crawled, and flew. Tiny mammals scurried through the leaf litter, their existence a secret held in the shadow of giants, while dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a hawk's patrolled the air above stagnant pools. Inland seas, born from the fracturing of Pangaea, cut deep into the continents, creating vast coastlines of lagoons, estuaries, and muddy deltas. These warm, shallow waters teemed with life. Ammonites, their coiled shells shimmering with iridescent mother-of-pearl, drifted in countless numbers, their tentacles trailing behind them. Beneath the surface, marine reptiles ruled. Long-necked plesiosaurs with paddle-like fins undulated gracefully, while sleek, dolphin-like ichthyosaurs shot through the water in pursuit of fish. On the shores, the mud was churned by the footprints of dinosaurs coming to drink, their impressions quickly filling with water, and the scuttling forms of freshwater crabs and horseshoe crabs. But this vibrancy was underpinned by a constant, ever-present danger. For every grazing stegosaurus, flicking its spiked tail nervously, there was an allosaurus lurking in the tree line, its gaze fixed and calculating. The world was a balance of immense power and profound vulnerability. A sick or young sauropod separated from the herd was a prize that could draw multiple predators, their attacks a brutal, chaotic spectacle of tearing flesh and bellowing pain. Even the skies were not safe, as large pterosaurs like Rhamphorhynchus would swoop down to snatch fish from the water or occasionally, a small unattended dinosaur hatchling from a riverbank. This was the Jurassic in its full, thunderous awakening, a world of breathtaking beauty and raw, unforgiving violence. It was an ecosystem operating at a scale and intensity never before seen on Earth, a complex web of life where every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest sauropod, played a part in the grand, noisy, and dangerous drama of survival. The planet had truly come alive, and its voice was a roar. A quiet revolution began to bloom in the shadows of the Jurassic giants. It started not with a roar or a tremor, but with a subtle unfurling of color in the undergrowth, a speck of crimson, a flash of yellow, a delicate wash of purple where before there had been only the muted greens and browns of ferns, cycads, and conifers. The first true flowers were opening their petals to the sun, a silent but profound declaration of a new era. These angiosperms, with their enclosed seeds and sophisticated reproductive strategies involving insects and the wind, were about to irrevocably alter the face of the planet. The world began to paint itself in new hues. Flowering plants spread with an astonishing rapidity, diversifying into a breathtaking array of forms. They crept along the forest floor as humble herbs, climbed as vines seeking the canopy, and grew into vast, broad-leaved trees that formed dense, colorful woodlands. Their leaves were broader and more efficient than those of the ancient gymnosperms, and they dropped seasonally, creating a rich, soft carpet on the forest floor that teemed with invertebrates and nourished the soil. The very air changed, carrying new pollens, and the faint, sweet perfumes designed to attract loyal partners in the form of bees, beetles, and other newly evolving insects. This botanical revolution demanded a new kind of dino. The great sauropods, with their simple peg-like teeth designed for stripping conifer branches, now browsed alongside a new generation of herbivores built for this softer, more varied menu. The ornithopods, like the duck-billed hadrosaurs, evolved complex dental batteries, hundreds of tightly packed teeth that formed a continuous grinding surface, perfect for pulverizing tough leaves and fibrous stems. They moved in immense cacophonous herds, their chewing a constant low roar that echoed through the flowering forests, their beaks perfectly shaped for cropping the new vegetation close to the ground. Even the most fearsome predators of the age found their world transformed. The smaller, feathered theropods, already nimble and intelligent, discovered a new bounty scampering through the undergrowth, the small mammals and lizards that thrived in the new, complex ecosystems created by the flowering plants. Some, like the bizarre Therizinosaurus, abandoned the hunt entirely, evolving long necks, small heads, and massive scythe-like claws, not for killing, but for pulling down branches to browse the tender leaves and fruits, their pot-bellied bodies built for digestion rather than pursuit. The Cretaceous landscape was no longer the monolithic green of the Jurassic. It was a patchwork quilt of environments. There were still vast conifer forests and fern prairies, but now they were interspersed with deciduous woodlands, open meadows ablaze with color, and riverbanks lined with flowering shrubs. This diversification of habitats drove an explosion of dinosaurian evolution unlike any before. Armored ankylosaurs lumbered through the thickets, their bodies a fortress against the new predators that stalked the floral maze. In the skies, birds, the direct descendants of their feathered dinosaur ancestors, darted and swooped, their feathers now potentially as brightly colored as the flowers below, a living testament to the most beautiful transformation the world had ever seen. Long before the ground shook with the tread of a 13-meter titan, the story of the tyrant lizard began in the shadows. Its lineage stretched back to the Jurassic, to a world of giants where survival favored either immense size or cunning speed. The ancestors of Tyrannosaurus were of the latter sort, small, agile hunters like the long-armed feathered Proceratosaurus, no larger than a human, that darted through the undergrowth of a world it did not yet rule. They were opportunistic, their world one of scavenged scraps and prey smaller than themselves, their existence a constant gamble against the true apex predators of their age. Millions of years of evolutionary pressure sculpted this unremarkable lineage into something new. As the continents continued to drift and the Cretaceous world bloomed, a branch of these theropods began to experiment with a dangerous trade-off: agility for power. The arms, once used for grasping, grew proportionally smaller as the skull began to enlarge, the jaws strengthening, the teeth thickening into bone-crushing pillars. This was the dawn of the tyrannosaurids, creatures like the North American Stokesosaurus, still modest in size but bearing the unmistakable genetic blueprint for the brute force predation that would come to define the end of an era. The true ascent began in the humid floodplains of ancient Asia. Here, giants like Tarbosaurus emerged, a direct and formidable precursor to the king itself. Standing over 4 meters tall, it was a monster in its own right, its massive head equipped with dozens of serrated teeth capable of shearing through muscle and bone. Its powerful legs were built for covering ground, its keen eyesight and sense of smell turning it into a relentless tracking machine. It was a predator that could not only take down the large hadrosaurs and ceratopsians of its ecosystem, but could also dominate them, intimidating competitors and claiming kills through sheer physical presence. This Asian dynasty eventually found a bridge to a new world. Fluctuating sea levels and temporary land connections allowed these advanced tyrannosaurs to cross into what is now North America, a land ripe with opportunity. The continent was a paradise of prey, vast herds of Triceratops and Edmontosaurus, armored Ankylosaurus, and smaller swift dinosaurs, all living under the rule of other, less specialized predators. The invading tyrannosaurs were a shock to the system, a new hyper-specialized force of nature. And from this lineage, in the very last few million years of the Cretaceous, the ultimate expression of the predator emerged. Tyrannosaurus rex was the culmination of over 100 million years of evolution. It was a creature of terrifying perfection. Its skull, a meter long and capable of exerting bone-shattering force, was mounted on a powerful S-curved neck. Its body was a ton of dense muscle, supported by legs built like columns, allowing for surprising bursts of speed. Its brain was large and complex, hinting at advanced problem-solving and possibly social behavior. It ruled a continent, the undisputed apex predator, its roar the final dominant sound of the dinosaur world, a tyrant born from humble beginnings that now stood alone at the pinnacle of creation. The Cretaceous sun beat down on a landscape adorned with living fortresses, where evolution had embarked on one of its most flamboyant and formidable experiments. From the humble bipedal ancestors that had scurried through the Triassic undergrowth, arose a lineage that chose to stand its ground, to face danger not with flight, but with a spectacular and intimidating display of bone. These were the ceratopsians, the horned faces, and they were transforming the open woodlands and floodplains into a gallery of living sculpture, each species a testament to the power of defensive ornamentation. It began modestly, with small, parrot-beaked herbivores like Psittacosaurus, whose frill was little more than a modest flange of bone at the back of the skull. But in the competitive, predator-rich world of the Cretaceous, the evolutionary pressure was immense. The frill began to expand, elongating into a great bony shield that curved over the neck and shoulders, a collar of solid bone that could protect the most vulnerable areas from the slashing bites of tyrannosaurs and other large theropods. At the same time, the nose and brow bones began to thicken and elongate, pushing through the skin as formidable horns, first as small bumps, then as lethal, forward-curving spikes. This was not a uniform process, but a wild, creative explosion. In some lineages, like that of the iconic Triceratops, the horns grew long and robust, a pair of spears mounted above the eyes, capable of goring and deflecting even the most determined attacker. Their frills, solid and massive, became a platform for anchoring the tremendous neck muscles needed to wield these weapons. Other species, like Styracosaurus, traded brow horns for a single, enormous nasal horn, while their frills erupted into a spectacular crown of long spikes, turning their heads into a bristling, defensive wall of sharpened bone. Yet the sheer variety and extravagance of these structures hinted at purposes beyond mere combat. The frills of some species, like Chasmosaurus, were not solid bone but vast, fenestrated sheets, too thin to offer much protection, but enormous and eye-catching, often adorned with bright, keratinous sheaths or vibrant skin patterns in life. These were billboards, not bucklers. In the mating seasons, males likely faced off not in bloody duels, but in displays of sheer visual magnificence, parading their headgear to attract mates and intimidate rivals with a silent language of size, symmetry, and color. The patterns may have also served for species recognition, a critical function in a world where dozens of different horned dinosaurs might share the same feeding grounds. The world of the horned titans was one of constant low-level tension. Great herds of these magnificent beasts moved across the fern prairies and through the open forests, their heads crowned with an incredible array of hooks, spikes, and shields, bobbing rhythmically as they cropped vegetation with their sharp beaks. The air was filled with the sound of their chewing and the low grunts of communication, but always, at the edge of the herd, sentinels stood watch, their impressive heads turning slowly, scanning the tree lines for movement. The sight of a predator would trigger a swift, coordinated response, a defensive circle formed, a wall of horns and frills facing outward, a living fortress that presented any attacker with an impossible and deadly puzzle. They were nature's knights, clad in bone, their very existence a bold and beautiful declaration of the will to survive. While the ceratopsians built their citadels of horn and bone, another lineage of dinosaurs pursued a different, even more extreme path to survival. In the dense undergrowth and across the open floodplains of the Cretaceous, evolution was forging living tanks, creatures so thoroughly encased in armor that they became nearly impervious to attack. These were the ankylosaurs and their close relatives, the nodosaurs, and they represented the pinnacle of defensive adaptation, turning their very bodies into impregnable fortresses. The transformation began from the inside out. Their vertebrae fused together over their hips and back, creating a solid, rigid foundation, a biological bedrock upon which the armor could be mounted. Then, the skin itself began to ossify. Tiny bone deposits called osteoderms formed within the skin across their backs, flanks, and even their eyelids. These were not random. They grew in precise, patterned rows and bands, interlocking like the stonework of a medieval castle. In the nodosaurs, These osteoderms often erupted into sharp, intimidating spikes that ran along the shoulders and down the sides, making the animal a treacherous landscape of pointed stone to any would-be attacker. The ankylosaurs took this principle of personal fortification to its ultimate conclusion. Their entire upper surface, from the tip of their snout to the very end of their tail, became a continuous sheet of bony plating, fused into a single, unbreakable shield. This carapace was often studded with massive conical spikes and ridged with keels of bone, a topography designed to shatter teeth and break claws. Even their skulls were reinforced, the bones fused solidly together and covered in a mosaic of smaller armored plates, leaving no weak point for a predator's bite to find purchase. They were so heavily built that their legs splayed outward slightly to support the tremendous weight of their own defenses, giving them a low, ground-hugging, and incredibly stable posture. But armor was only half of their formidable design. For the ankylosaurs, defense was not a passive state. Their most famous weapon was their tail, an evolutionary masterpiece of biomechanical engineering. The latter half of the tail was stiffened by ossified tendons, transforming it from a flexible appendage into a rigid muscular handle. At its end, the vertebrae fused into a massive bony club, often studded with knobs of bone. This was not a mere ornament, it was a wrecking ball of bone and sinew. With powerful muscles at its base, the ankylosaur could swing this club with devastating force and surprising speed, capable of shattering the leg bone of a towering tyrannosaur with a single, well-placed blow. The nodosaurs, while lacking the iconic tail club, were no less formidable. Their strategy was one of absolute, immovable defense. When threatened, a nodosaur would simply lower its head, crouch close to the ground, and present its back a nearly seamless expanse of spiked and ridged armor. It became a living boulder, an impossible meal that offered no vulnerable flank or soft underbelly. A predator would find nothing to bite but solid bone and sharp spikes, a guarantee of injury for meager reward. These armored fortresses moved through their world with a slow, deliberate, and unconcerned grace. They were creatures of immense patience, their small heads equipped with leaf-shaped teeth for cropping the low-lying ferns and flowering plants, utterly confident in their own invulnerability. The sound of their passage was the rustle of vegetation and the heavy, ponderous thud of their feet. They were the ultimate embodiment of a defensive strategy, so perfectly adapted to withstand violence that they moved through a world of predators in a state of near-perfect peace, their very existence a silent, stony defiance of the Cretaceous's deadliest threats. The stone held a secret, one that would unravel a century of certainty and redraw the boundaries of life itself. It was not the grand, dramatic skeleton of a titan that sparked the revolution, but the delicate, almost ghostly impressions surrounding a smaller, crow-sized dinosaur from the ancient lake shores of Liaoning, China. Preserved in exquisite, heart-breaking detail in the fine-grained ash of a volcanic eruption, the fossil of Sinosauropteryx did not just show bone, it showed a halo, a faint, fuzzy outline of soft tissue, a downy coat of simple, branching filaments that clung to its body like a warm shroud. This was not scale, not leathery hide, but something entirely unexpected: primitive feathers. The discovery sent seismic waves through the world of paleontology. Dinosaurs had always been portrayed as quintessential reptiles, scaly, sometimes spiky, but always reptilian. The image of the terrible lizard was ingrained in science and public imagination alike, but here was incontrovertible evidence that the line between dinosaur and bird, so clearly drawn in textbook diagrams, was not a line at all, but a blurred and gradual transition. The feathered enigma had been unearthed, and it demanded a radical reimagining of the Mesozoic world. More fossils followed from the same fossil beds, each more astonishing than the last. Caudipteryx was discovered, a turkey-sized theropod with a fan of modern-looking symmetrical feathers at the end of its tail and on its hands, clearly not for flight but for display. Then came Microraptor, a four-winged dromaeosaur with fully formed, aerodynamic flight feathers on both its arms and its legs, a creature straight out of a myth, a dinosaur that could glide from tree to tree. These were not birds, Their skeletons were undeniably those of classic predatory dinosaurs: long tails, sharp teeth, clawed hands, yet they were clad in the very same structures that allow a sparrow to take to the air. This feathered revolution forced a profound shift in perspective. It meant that feathers, one of the most complex integumentary structures in nature, did not evolve for flight. Their origin was far more ancient and humble. They began as simple, hair-like filaments, perhaps for insulation, to help small active theropods regulate their body temperature in the cool of the night or the shade of the forest. This suggested a level of metabolic sophistication, a warmer, more active physiology than had ever been attributed to dinosaurs. They were not slow, cold-blooded giants, but dynamic, energetic animals. The implications spread like wildfire across the dinosaur family tree. If small predatory theropods had feathers, could their larger cousins have had them too? Juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex might have been covered in a coat of insulating fuzz, which it shed as it grew into its immense heat-retaining bulk. Perhaps the vicious velociraptor of Mongolia, when accurately reconstructed, was not a bold, scaly lizard, but a fearsome predator insulated by a coat of feathers, its famous killer claw hidden within a fluffy leg. The world of dinosaurs was no longer a world of dull greens and grays, but potentially one of vibrant, feathered color and texture, a world where the thunderous steps of giants were taken by creatures far stranger and more beautiful than anyone had ever dreamed. The ancient past had become wonderfully, bewilderingly unfamiliar. If the fossils revealed the shocking presence of feathers, they left their colors and purposes to the imagination, a canvas for scientific speculation, painted with the pigments of evolutionary logic. The discovery of melanosomes, microscopic pigment-bearing structures preserved in the fossilized feathers of dinosaurs like Antiornis, provided the first tantalizing hints of true color. This small feathered predator from the Jurassic was not the muted gray of old museum models, but a creature of striking contrast, with a reddish-brown crest, a speckled white and black body, and wings adorned with bold, dark bands. The Mesozoic world, once imagined in monochrome, suddenly exploded into a potential riot of color, pattern, and display. This revelation opened a window into the behavior of these long-vanished creatures. The elaborate plumage was not merely functional, it was communicative. In the dense forests and across the open plains, visual signals would have been paramount. A male Caudipteryx, for instance, might have raised its tail fan and splayed its arm feathers in a vibrant courtship dance, a silent performance of fitness and health designed to attract a mate. The patterns could have served as warnings, like the stripes of a modern tiger, or as camouflage, breaking up the outline of a hunter against a variegated background of fern and flower. Feathers became a dynamic language, written in iridescent blues, fiery reds, and earthy browns. The evolution of these complex structures spoke of a profound shift in dinosaurian biology. Insulation suggested warm-bloodedness, or at least a degree of endothermy that allowed for sustained activity. A fluffy coating would have been essential for maintaining a high metabolic rate, especially for smaller dinosaurs and juveniles, enabling them to be active hunters and foragers regardless of the ambient temperature. This new view painted dinosaurs as energetic, agile, and intensely active animals, a far cry from the sluggish, cold-blooded behemoths of outdated imagery. They were creatures that cared for their young, communicated in complex ways, and lived rich social lives, behaviors supported by the energy that feathers helped conserve. The feathered enigma ultimately redefined the very concept of a dinosaur, blurring it seamlessly into the definition of a bird. It demonstrated that birds did not descend from dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, the only lineage to survive the great extinction and carry the legacy forward. Every crow on a wire, every sparrow in a bush, is a living theropod dinosaur. Its feathers a direct inheritance from Jurassic ancestors. This continuity made the evolutionary journey not a series of abrupt leaps, but a graceful, interconnected narrative. The powerful arms of a predator, over millions of years, gradually elongated and feathered, becoming wings. The rigid, bony tail shortened into a pygostyle, a platform for steering feathers. The story was one of gradual, exquisite modification. The world of the dinosaurs was therefore not a foreign planet populated by monsters, but a familiar one, a direct precursor to our own. It was a world where a T-Rex might have watched a feathered dromaeosaur flit through the trees with a recognition that they were distant cousins, both products of the same magnificent evolutionary experiment. The enigma of feathers solved a greater mystery. It revealed the deep, beautiful connectivity of life on Earth, showing that the most dramatic and successful transformations often begin with something as simple and fragile as a filament, a whisper of warmth that would one day conquer the sky. They moved through the world like mountains given life, their passage a low, seismic rhythm felt through the very bones of the Earth. The sauropods, the true titans of the Mesozoic, were creatures of such impossible scale that their very existence posed a profound biological riddle. How could an animal the weight of a dozen elephants not only support its own mass but thrive, dominate, and multiply across entire continents for over 100 million years? Their skeletons, laid bare in museum halls, are cathedrals of bone, but they are only the framework for a mystery built of flesh, metabolism, and evolutionary genius. The secret began with a revolution in breathing. Unlike the simple bellows of a mammal's lungs, sauropods possessed a system of air sacs that extended from their lungs into their very bones, much like their modern bird cousins. This avian-style respiration was a masterpiece of biological engineering. It was a one-way flow system, far more efficient than the in-and-out breathing of other animals, ensuring a constant supply of oxygen to fuel their colossal bodies and, crucially, preventing the fatal buildup of heat that such immense bulk would otherwise generate. These air sacs also hollowed out their vertebrae, lightening the skeleton without sacrificing strength, turning a potential liability of scale into a structural advantage. Their necks, those impossibly long conduits of life, were not heavy burdens but elegantly lightweight constructions of bone and air, allowing them to sweep their heads across vast swathes of vegetation with minimal effort. Their immense size itself was its own defense and its own solution. In the world of predators, there is a point where a herbivore becomes simply too large to be considered viable prey. A full-grown Argentinosaurus, stretching over 100 feet and weighing perhaps 80 tons, was virtually invulnerable. No theropod, not even the mighty T-Rex of a later age, could realistically bring down such a behemoth. Their size also granted them access to a food source no other creature could reach, the canopies of the towering conifers and ginkgos. Their long necks acted as living cranes, enabling them to browse treetops while keeping their massive bodies stationary, conserving immense amounts of energy. They were not fast-moving consumers but efficient, sweeping harvesters of the highest calories. Their feeding strategy was a study in volume and efficiency. Their heads were remarkably small and light, ending in simple, peg-like or spoon-shaped teeth, perfect for stripping leaves and needles, but not for chewing. They did not need to. Their solution to digestion was one of sheer internal capacity and patience. They would swallow vast quantities of vegetation whole, which would then ferment for days within their enormous barrel-shaped bodies, a slow bacterial process that extracted every available nutrient from the tough, fibrous plants. They were walking fermentation vats, turning otherwise indigestible foliage into fuel for their legendary growth, capable of adding several pounds of body weight every single day during their youth. The mechanics of their most famous feature, the long neck, remain a subject of lively debate. Could they truly raise them like giraffes to browse the highest branches, or did they mostly sweep them laterally at shoulder level, vacuuming up ferns and shrubs? The structure of their vertebrae and the wear patterns on their teeth suggest different species adopted different strategies. Some may have been high browsers, their necks held almost vertically, while others were mid-level feeders. Their cardiovascular system must have been equally miraculous, featuring a powerful, multi-chambered heart and likely a complex series of valves and blood reservoirs to manage the immense pressure needed to pump blood up to a brain that could be stories above the ground. They were not merely large, they were perfectly intricately adapted to a life of grandeur. Their pillar-like legs, straight and powerful, were built like suspension bridges, distributing their phenomenal weight with expert biomechanical precision. Their feet were broad and padded, like those of an elephant, functioning as natural snowshoes to prevent them from sinking into the soft mud of their riverine habitats. Every aspect of their form, from their air-filled bones to their fermenting guts to their sweeping necks, was a coordinated answer to the challenges of gigantism. They were the ultimate expression of a world that had time, space, and resources enough for miracles, a testament to evolution's ability to build not just for survival, but for sublime, earth-shaking magnificence. The sun did not rise for months, and a profound cold gripped the land, locking the world in a deep blue twilight. Ice crystals hung in the still air, and the silence was broken only by the groan of shifting glaciers and the crunch of snow underfoot. This was not a world forsaken by life, but one of its most astonishing frontiers, the polar regions of the Cretaceous, where dinosaurs not only survived but thrived in conditions of freezing darkness that would seem unimaginable for creatures often depicted as tropical giants. Here, in the perpetual winter of the ancient Arctic and Antarctic circles, evolution forged a unique and hardy breed of dinosaur, adapted to a world of extremes. Fossil evidence from places like Alaska's North Slope and the icy cliffs of Antarctica tells a compelling story of resilience. The bones of hadrosaurs, small tyrannosaurs, and troodontids are found in abundance, their remains preserved in sediments that were once deposited within the polar circles. These were not the occasional wanderer or lost migrant. These were year-round residents, their growth rings showing patterns of seasonal stress and rapid summer growth, a testament to lives lived in a land of midnight suns and long, sunless winters. The world they inhabited was not a frozen wasteland, but a cool, temperate environment, though one that still endured months of freezing temperatures and near-total darkness. Survival in such a place demanded extraordinary adaptations. While the climate was warmer than today's poles with no permanent ice caps, the long polar winter presented a formidable challenge: how to find food and retain warmth through months of frigid darkness. For the herbivorous hadrosaurs, this likely meant relying on a diet of tough, evergreen conifers, horsetails, and ferns that could persist through the winter, their massive dental batteries grinding the fibrous material into digestible pulp. They may have migrated short distances to find the most sheltered valleys, or perhaps they cached food, though evidence for such complex behavior remains elusive. The predators of this icy realm, like the agile and intelligent troodontids, faced a different set of problems. Their large eyes, relative to their skull size, suggest an enhanced ability to see in low-light conditions, a critical advantage for hunting during the dim twilight of the polar winter or under the aurora-lit skies. Their potential coat of feathers would have been essential, not for display, but as a critical layer of insulation against the biting cold. A fluffy, downy coat would have trapped a layer of warm air against their skin, allowing these warm-blooded hunters to remain active and alert while other, less insulated creatures grew sluggish. The greatest mystery of the polar dinosaurs is not how they ate, but how they endured the cold itself. Their sheer size would have been an advantage, as larger bodies lose heat more slowly than smaller ones, a principle known as gigantothermy. A multi-ton hadrosaur would have cooled very slowly, its immense bulk acting as a thermal reservoir. Furthermore, evidence suggests that some polar dinosaurs may have entered a state of torpor during the very coldest, darkest weeks, slowing their metabolism to a crawl to conserve energy, much like some modern mammals do during hibernation. They were not merely enduring the cold, they were masters of it. Their lives a delicate and sophisticated dance with the seasons, a testament to the incredible plasticity of life and its stubborn will to carve out a home in even the most unforgiving corners of the earth. While the continents thundered under the feet of titans, a different kind of dynasty held absolute sway in the planet's vast blue heart. The Mesozoic seas were not a refuge from the age of reptiles, but a parallel empire ruled by creatures just as magnificent and terrifying as their terrestrial cousins. These were not dinosaurs but their distant marine relatives, the ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs, each an evolutionary masterpiece perfectly adapted to a life of aquatic dominion. turning the ancient oceans into a realm of breathtaking predators and elusive giants. The ichthyosaurs were the first to claim the seas, evolving a form so perfectly streamlined for the water that they became near mirrors of modern dolphins and tuna. Their bodies were sleek torpedoes, their limbs transformed into efficient paddles, and their tails powered by a great crescent-shaped fin that propelled them through the water with breathtaking speed. Their large, dark adapted eyes, some larger than dinner plates, suggest they hunted in the deep, murky abyss, pursuing schools of fish and squid in a world of perpetual twilight. They were living proof of convergent evolution, a reptile that had so thoroughly embraced the ocean that it had shed every trace of its terrestrial ancestry, even giving birth to live young at sea, never needing to return to land. Later, the plesiosaurs arrived, offering a stark contrast in design. Where the ichthyosaurs were built for speed, the plesiosaurs were built for grace and power. Their bodies were oddly shaped, like a turtle's shell with a long tail attached, but it was their four enormous wing-like flippers that made them unique. They flew through the water with an underwater flight stroke, all four flippers moving in a complex, harmonious motion that granted them incredible maneuverability and a surprising burst of acceleration. Some, like the long-necked elasmosaurs, used their incredible necks, sometimes boasting over 70 vertebrae, to dart their small heads into schools of fish like a reptilian spear. Others, like the giant-headed pliosaurs, were the apex predators of their time, their immense jaws and conical teeth capable of taking down any other marine reptile. But the final, and in many ways most fearsome, rulers of the Cretaceous seas were the mosasaurs. They were the latecomers, evolving from a lineage of monitor lizard-like ancestors that had boldly returned to the water. They never entirely lost their lizard-like appearance, but evolution sculpted them into monstrously efficient hunters. Their bodies elongated, their tails developed a shark-like fin for powerful thrust, and their limbs flattened into strong steering paddles. Their most terrifying feature was their jaws, which were doubly hinged like those of a snake, allowing them to open their mouths impossibly wide to swallow large prey whole. They were the ultimate generalists, patrolling the warm, shallow inland seas that flooded the continents, consuming everything from ammonites and birds to other marine reptiles with ruthless efficiency. This aquatic realm was a world of constant, silent pursuit. The water, clear and sun-dappled near the surface, teemed with life. Ammonites drifted in shimmering clouds, their coiled shells glittering, while belemnites, squid-like creatures with internal shells, jetted away from danger. Giant sea turtles paddled serenely through the reefs, and schools of bony fish flickered like living silver. But beneath this apparent tranquility, the hierarchy was absolute. The sleek shadow of an ichthyosaur could cut through a school of fish in a blur, a plesiosaur's head could snap forward from the gloom with shocking speed, and the mosasaur, the true leviathan of the age, cruised as the undisputed master, a reminder that the dinosaurs' rule stopped at the water's edge, where a different set of reptilian kings held the deep in their powerful aquatic grip. They were the first vertebrates ever to conquer the air, and they did so on wings of membrane and ambition, casting their shadows over a world that had never known such lords of the sky. The pterosaurs were not dinosaurs, but cousins, a separate and spectacularly successful lineage that evolved the power of flight tens of millions of years before birds would take to the same air. Their reign was one of breathtaking diversity, from delicate sparrow-sized insect hunters to the largest flying creatures the world has ever seen, with wingspans that dwarfed those of any modern bird. The secret to their flight lay in a single, spectacularly modified finger. The fourth finger on each hand elongated to an incredible degree, forming the primary spar of the wing. From this bony strut stretched a tough, flexible membrane of skin that attached all the way down the side of the body to the ankle. This was not a feathered wing, but a living airfoil, a sail of skin that could be precisely controlled by fine muscles to adjust camber and angle, granting them a grace and maneuverability in the air that was unparalleled. Their bones were hollow and paper-thin, a masterpiece of weight-saving engineering that allowed for immense size without sacrificing the power-to-weight ratio critical for flight. And what a range of sizes they achieved. At one end of the spectrum were creatures like a neurognathus, no larger than a swift, with broad, short wings perfect for hawking insects in the dense, cluttered air of the Jurassic forests. They were acrobats of the twilight, their large eyes scanning for the faintest movement. At the other extreme were the true sky dragons, the Azdarchids of the late Cretaceous. These were creatures of nightmare and wonder, like the immense Quetzalcoatlus, standing as tall as a giraffe on the ground, with a wingspan stretching over 10 meters wider than a small aircraft. They were the rulers of the open skies, soaring on thermal updrafts over inland seas and floodplains, their long, toothless beaks perfect for plucking fish from the water or scavenging carcasses on land. Their flight was not the frantic flapping of a sparrow, but often a stately, energy-efficient soar. They would launch themselves from cliffs or simply push off from the ground with their powerful forelimbs, catching the wind and rising with minimal effort. Their brains, studies of fossil skulls suggest, contained enlarged regions associated with balance and spatial processing, the neurological hardware necessary for the complex calculus of flight. They were not clumsy gliders but active, powerful flyers, capable of crossing vast distances and migrating across continents. The world, from their perspective, was a map of opportunity. They patrolled the coastlines, their sharp eyes spotting the flicker of fish near the surface before diving to skim them from the water with their beaks. They followed great herds of dinosaurs, waiting to scavenge the weak and the dead. They nested in vast, noisy colonies on remote sea cliffs, their leathery winged young taking their first clumsy flights over chasms that dropped away to the roaring ocean below. They were an essential thread in the Mesozoic tapestry, their silent, graceful forms a constant presence in the skies above the thunder of the dinosaurs, a reminder that the age of reptiles had not just conquered the land, but had also magnificently claimed the air. Beyond the celebrated giants and fearsome predators, the Mesozoic world teemed with a host of lesser-known dinosaurs, each a unique testament to evolution's boundless creativity. These forgotten species, discovered in fossil beds from Patagonia to Mongolia, were experiments in form and function, creatures that carved out specialized niches in a world dominated by titans. Their stories, pieced together from fragmentary bones and rare impressions, reveal a tapestry of life far more intricate and bizarre than often imagined. In the shadowy undergrowth of Cretaceous Europe, a small feathered hunter known as Balar Bondok stalked its prey. This Romanian dinosaur was a dromaeosaur, a cousin to the famous velociraptor, but built like a pit bull, with a robust, stocky body and not one but two large sickle-shaped killing claws on each foot. Its unique anatomy suggested a life of grappling with larger prey or climbing through dense island forests, a specialized predator in an isolated ecosystem cut off from the mainland. Its double-clawed feet were a grim and efficient adaptation, a forgotten marvel of evolutionary problem-solving. Meanwhile, in the ancient floodplains of what is now Argentina, a truly bizarre herbivore browsed among the cycads. Amargasaurus, a relatively small sauropod, was unlike any of its long-necked relatives. Its neck and back were not adorned with typical spines, but with two parallel rows of extraordinary, elongated vertebrae that stretched upward like a double-sided saw. These spines, likely covered in keratinous sheaths in life, may have supported a fleshy sail for display or thermoregulation, or they may have been wielded as a defensive weapon, making the animal's back a treacherous thicket of sharpened bone for any predator daring enough to attack. The deserts of Mongolia yielded the remains of another enigma, Dinosaurs. For decades it was known only from a pair of terrifying, 8-foot-long arms ending in 3 massive claws, a fossil that promised a monster of unimaginable proportions. When the rest of the skeleton was finally discovered, it revealed not a sleek predator, but a colossal, hump-backed, beaked omnivore with a spoon-shaped bill and a voracious appetite. Its back was topped with a sail-like structure, and its broad hips and massive legs suggested a slow, ponderous gait. This gentle giant likely used its infamous arms to dig for roots and plants in riverbanks and defend itself from the true predators of its world, a peaceful behemoth hiding behind the limbs of a nightmare. From the polar regions came Lathalanosaura, a small bipedal herbivore that endured the long, dark winters of ancient Australia, which then lay within the Antarctic Circle. Its large eye sockets hint at an enhanced ability to see in the low light of the polar winter, and its brain casts show enlarged optic lobes, suggesting a creature supremely adapted to a world of months-long twilight. It was a testament to endurance, a small, active dinosaur that likely foraged for whatever tough vegetation it could find under the aurora-lit skies, its life a constant struggle against cold and darkness. These forgotten species, from the double-clawed belar to the sail-backed Amargasaurus, the bizarre Deinocarus, and the polar survivor Leolenosaura, were the unsung inhabitants of the dinosaur world. They were the specialists and the oddities, the creatures that prove evolution is not a straight line toward obvious perfection, but a wild, branching experiment in survival. Their fossils, often incomplete and always mysterious, remind us that for every T. rex or triceratops, there were 100 other unique forms, each with its own story written in bone, waiting in the stone to be remembered. The orderly narrative of deep time is occasionally disrupted by a whisper from the stone, a fossil that defies easy categorization and challenges the very foundations of paleontological understanding. These anomalies are not the grand, complete skeletons that fill museum halls, but the fragmentary, the bizarre, and the seemingly out-of-place enigmas wrapped in layers of rock and mystery. They are the unexplained fossils, and they hint at a past far stranger and more complex than any textbook dared suggest. Among the most perplexing are the peculiar bone structures that appear almost alien in their design. In the late Cretaceous deposits of Mongolia, paleontologists unearthed the remains of a small theropod, Dinosaurus, but for decades knew it only from a pair of monstrous, 8-foot-long arms ending in 3 savage claws. The mind conjured images of a predator of nightmare proportions, a creature built around these terrifying appendages. When the full skeleton was finally recovered, it revealed not a sleek hunter, but a colossal, hump-backed, beaked omnivore with a spoon-shaped bill and a voracious appetite. Its infamous arms, once thought to be instruments of death, were more likely used for digging up roots and vegetation, a peaceful purpose belying their monstrous appearance. The disconnect between expectation and reality was a stark lesson in the dangers of presumption. Other findings border on the surreal. The fossilized remains of Protoceratops, a sheep-sized horned dinosaur, are sometimes found locked in a death struggle with the predatory Velociraptor, their skeletons intertwined for eternity in the sandstone of the Gobi Desert. These dramatic tableaus provide unparalleled snapshots of behavior, but they also raise unanswerable questions. Was it a sudden sandstorm that buried them mid-conflict, preserving the violence of that final moment? Or was the Velociraptor simply scavenging an already dead carcass when it too was overcome? The fossils tell a story of dramatic interaction, but the precise chapter and verse are lost to time, leaving only a haunting, silent image of life and death in the Cretaceous. Even more confounding are the fossils that seem to belong to another age entirely. In certain rock layers well documented and dated to the late Jurassic, paleontologists have occasionally found the perplexing, shovel-shaped teeth of a group of dinosaurs called hadrosaurs, creatures that, according to the established fossil record, should not evolve for another 50 million years in the Cretaceous. These lonely teeth, as they are sometimes called, are often dismissed as having eroded from younger layers above and been redeposited below, a geological fluke, but when found in situ, in pristine Jurassic rock, they force an uncomfortable question: did hadrosaurs appear, die out, and then reappear millions of years later? Or is the story of their evolution, written in stone, somehow incomplete or out of order? Then there are the traces that hint at something beyond bone. In a few rare instances, the stone around a fossil seems to show a pattern, a discoloration or impression that suggests the outline of internal organs. A famous specimen of a small ornithopod from South Dakota was once heralded as preserving a fossilized heart, a 4-chambered advanced pump that suggested a warm-blooded physiology. The claim ignited fierce debate, with other scientists arguing the structure was merely a mineral concretion, a trick of geology and wishful thinking. The line between a preserved organ and a fortuitous-shaped rock is vanishingly thin, and such discoveries live in a contentious space, offering a breathtaking glimpse of soft anatomy one moment and dissolving into scientific controversy the next. These unexplained fossils are the loose threads in the tapestry of prehistory. They are the anomalies that keep paleontologists humble and curious, reminding them that for every rule of evolution, there may be a spectacular exception waiting in the next layer of shale. They are not evidence of failure, but of a world so vast and ancient that it will always hold secrets, its deepest truths whispered not in the thunderous footprints of giants, but in the quiet, puzzling details of a single strange bone. The stone continued to guard its most intimate secrets, offering up fossils that challenged not just the timeline of evolution, but the very nature of the creatures themselves. Among the most startling were the rare contested glimpses of soft anatomy, preserved through a miraculous confluence of rapid burial and fine-grained sediment. A fossil from the Hell Creek Formation, that of a small herbivorous Thescelosaurus, became the center of a firestorm when researchers claimed the ghostly impression in its chest cavity was that of a four-chambered heart. The implications were staggering: a sophisticated, avian-style pump that suggested a warm-blooded, highly active physiology for at least some dinosaurs. Yet the debate raged, with skeptics arguing it was merely a siderite concretion, a lump of ironstone that had fortuitously formed in the shape of a heart. The line between revolutionary insight and geological accident proved agonizingly thin, a reminder of how desperately the past guards its truths. Even more enigmatic were the fossils that hinted at behaviors far more complex than previously imagined. In a Montana dig site, a weathered bone from a large hadrosaur was found with a peculiar, perfectly circular puncture wound that had begun to heal. The size and shape matched the tooth of a Tyrannosaurus rex, but the healed bone told a story not of a kill. The duck-billed dinosaur had survived an encounter with the most formidable predator on Earth, living for weeks or months afterward. This single fossil was a narrative in miniature, a testament to individual resilience, and a hint that even the most powerful predators did not always succeed, that the Cretaceous world was one of near misses and second chances as much as it was of certain death. The most controversial finds, however, were those that strayed into the realm of the seemingly impossible. A handful of curious stones, found in Cretaceous layers alongside dinosaur fossils, were put forward by a few researchers as potential tools. These stones, with their worn, polished surfaces and unusual shapes, were suggested to be gastroliths, stones swallowed by dinosaurs to aid in digestion, that had been selectively chosen and even modified. The idea of tool-using dinosaurs was, and remains, a fringe theory, overwhelmingly dismissed by the mainstream scientific community as wishful interpretation of naturally tumbled rocks. Yet, their presence in gizzard assemblages of large sauropods and theropods spoke to a different kind of intelligence, an instinctual understanding of using external objects to process food, a primitive form of tool use that blurred the line between instinct and cognition. Perhaps the most haunting unexplained fossils were those that were not fossils at all, but their echoes. The famous Paluxy River trackways in Texas showed the unmistakable footprints of a large sauropod, but pressed within the same layer, and seemingly overlapping, were the tracks of a large theropod. For decades, some pointed to this as evidence of a hunt, a dramatic chase preserved in mud. Others argued it was a coincidence of paths taken at different times. The truth was forever lost to erosion and time, the story reduced to a tantalizing pattern of depressions in rock, a Rorschach test onto which scientists and enthusiasts could project their own visions of the past, a peaceful crossing of paths or a life-and-death pursuit. These contested interpretations and anomalous findings were the puzzles that ensured the study of dinosaurs would never grow stagnant. They were the questions written in stone that refused to yield easy answers, the shadows in the corner of the fossil record that hinted at a reality far richer and more complex than the skeletons alone could convey. They served as a perpetual reminder that the Mesozoic world, for all its apparent familiarity through the lens of science, remained an alien planet, its full story forever beyond recovery, its deepest mysteries lingering in the enigmatic spaces between the bones. The bones told the story of the creature, but the footprints told the story of its life, preserved in the fine silt of an ancient riverbank, now turned to solid stone. A single line of three-toed impressions marched across the rock face. Each print was a perfect negative, a moment of weight and motion frozen for eternity. The stride was long and confident, the depth of the impression speaking of a creature of considerable size and speed. This was not merely a fossil, it was a ghostly passage, a record of a journey taken over 100 million years ago, a solitary hunter perhaps, moving with purpose through a wet Cretaceous morning. But a trackway was rarely a single story. A few yards farther on, the silt told a different tale. The confident stride broke into a skid, the toes digging deep as the animal pivoted sharply. Another set of tracks, smaller and more numerous, intersected here, scattering in a panicked array of shallow, scrambling impressions. The narrative was clear: a moment of pursuit, a sudden turn, the explosive scatter of prey. The stone held the tension of that ancient encounter, the silent chase captured in dried mud, a drama without a known ending. Whether the hunter succeeded or the prey escaped was a secret the rock would not relinquish, leaving only the heart-pounding climax forever suspended in time. Some trackways were not tales of hunt or flight, but of congregation. In certain sites the ground was a chaotic jumble of footprints, all of the same type, overlapping and interweaving in a chaotic tapestry. The sheer density of tracks spoke of a herd, dozens, perhaps hundreds of individuals moving together. The sizes varied greatly, from deep bowl-like impressions of massive adults to the tiny delicate prints of juveniles tucked safely within the group. This was evidence of social structure, of protection, of a mass migration across a landscape. The trackway became a census, a record of a population on the move, their collective weight trampling the earth into a hardpan that would outlast the ages. Yet for all the stories they told, trackways also held maddening puzzles. A single site might reveal the prints of a giant sauropod, its elephantine rounds sunk deep into the mud, but walking on its hind legs only, with no sign of its forelimbs touching the ground. Was it floating in deep water, punting itself along the bottom with its back legs? Or was there some unknown bipedal gait for these behemoths that no skeleton could ever suggest? Other trackways showed the prints of a theropod walking parallel to those of a sauropod, their paths never converging, for mile after fossilized mile. Was this a scavenger patiently waiting for weakness, a curious follower, or merely a coincidence of path? Two lives intersecting without interaction, a mystery of proximity without context. The greatest enigma of all was the trackway that should not exist. In a few rare, contentious sites, a human-like footprint was found pressed into the same Cretaceous stone that held dinosaur tracks. These were inevitably dismissed by science as geological oddities, the result of erosion carving a shape that merely resembled a foot or a hoax carved into ancient rock. But for a moment, before reason intervened, they offered a dizzying, impossible vision, a witness. They whispered a tantalizing, heretical question of coexistence, a ghost in the machine of deep time that challenged the entire narrative of history. Though explained away, these anomalous prints served their purpose. They were a perfect reminder that the past is a foreign country, and its footprints, even the clearest ones, can sometimes lead down paths of profound and bewildering mystery. The Mesozoic was not a world of invincible titans, but a realm where every creature, no matter how grand, was subject to the frailties of flesh and bone. The evidence of this ancient suffering is locked within the very fossils that speak of their power, a silent testament written in the language of paleopathology, the study of disease and injury in the long dead. A Tyrannosaurus rex femur, massive and imposing, might reveal a ghastly, gnarled lesion where a bone infection raged, a painful festering wound that the animal carried for years, perhaps slowing its mighty stride, but not breaking its will to survive. A hadrosaur's tail vertebra, fused grotesquely with its neighbor, tells a story of a devastating fracture, a fall or a blow that healed badly, leaving the animal with a permanent crippling stiffness, a reminder of a single moment of misstep or violence that altered the course of its life. These afflictions were as varied as the dinosaurs themselves. Some bore the signs of brutal combat, the price of dominance or defense. The frills of male triceratops often show puncture wounds and cracks that perfectly match the horns and beak of another of its kind, evidence of ferocious dueling during mating seasons. These injuries, some healed and some fatal, paint a picture of ritualized violence, where the right to pass on genes was earned through trial by combat, leaving lasting scars on the victors and the vanquished alike. The shattered ribs of a predatory allosaur, its own body a map of its violent profession, speak of a desperate struggle with prey that fought back with devastating force, a kick from a stegosaur's thagomizer, or a trampling from a panicked sauropod. Other ailments were quieter, more insidious. Tumors, those cruel betrayals of the body's own cells, have been found in the bones of dinosaurs from diverse lineages. A benign hemangioma in the tail of a duck-billed dinosaur, or the devastating evidence of metastatic cancer in a Centrosaurus leg bone, reveal that the shadow of malignancy is as ancient as vertebrate life itself. These internal rebellions would have caused lameness, swelling, and chronic pain, slowly sapping the strength of giants, making them vulnerable long before a predator ever drew near. Arthritis, too, left its mark, seizing the joints of aging behemoths, the smooth cartilage worn away until bone ground painfully on bone with every step, every turn of the head, every chew of tough vegetation. Even the process of feeding, the most fundamental act of life, could be a source of injury. The teeth of great carnivores, constantly broken and shed in the violent act of bringing down struggling prey and crunching through bone, were replaced in a continuous cycle. But sometimes, an abscess would form at the root of a damaged tooth, creating a painful infection that could eat into the jawbone itself, leaving a gaping sinus that must have been a constant, agonizing torment. For the immense sauropods, the sheer mechanical stress of supporting their own phenomenal weight could lead to stress fractures in their pillar-like legs and feet, a dull, persistent ache that was the price of their grandeur. These fossils of affliction are perhaps the most poignant of all. They bridge the unimaginable gulf of time, transforming the dinosaurs from mythical monsters into real, breathing animals that knew pain, endured suffering, and fought for every day of life. A healed injury is a story of resilience, a creature that overcame trauma, infection, and disability to walk, feed, and survive for weeks, months, or years after a catastrophic event. They were not invulnerable gods, but mortal beings, their magnificent forms as susceptible to breakage and disease as any other. Their lives a continuous, hard-fought battle, not just against predators and rivals, but against the silent internal betrayals of their own bodies. The evidence of their existence was often written not in grand, singular skeletons, but in the subtle, collective grammar of the stone itself. A single bone could tell of an individual's life, but a bone bed, a chaotic jumble of hundreds of individuals of the same species, all entombed together in a single geological moment, told a story of community, of a social fabric woven deep into the Mesozoic world. These mass graves were the starkest clues to the complex social lives of dinosaurs, suggesting herds that moved, fed, and perished as one, their fates inextricably linked. For the great herbivores, the herd was a fortress. The vast accumulations of hadrosaur bones, all ages and sizes mixed together, painted a picture of multi-generational families. Adults would have formed a protective ring around the vulnerable young, their sheer numbers creating a living wall that could confuse and deter even the most determined predator. The constant, low-frequency rumble of their calls would have been the soundtrack of their existence, a means of keeping the herd together across the dense fern prairies and through the misty river valleys, a communication network that bound them into a single, breathing entity. Their synchronized movements, hinted at by parallel trackways stretching for miles, spoke of a collective intelligence, a shared purpose in migration toward fresh grazing grounds or safe nesting sites. The predators, too, showed signs of sophisticated social behavior. The famous Cleveland Lloyd dinosaur quarry in Utah held the remains of numerous Allosaurus individuals, a concentration of apex predators that defied the solitary nature of most large carnivores. This was not a single catastrophic event, but a predator trap, a boggy area that claimed victims over time. The sheer number of Allosaurs suggested they might have hunted in loose packs, or at least tolerated each other's presence at a large kill, a behavior that would have allowed them to bring down prey far larger than any single hunter could manage. Their success was not just in their teeth and claws, but in their potential for cooperation. The most intimate glimpses into dinosaur society came from their nesting grounds, in a place now called Egg Mountain in Montana. Paleontologists found the meticulously arranged nests of the Hypsilophdontid Orodromeus. The nests were spaced evenly apart, each a carefully constructed mound of vegetation, suggesting a colonial nesting site where multiple females laid their eggs in a safe communal area. This was not a scene of neglect, but of parental investment. The presence of tiny, worn baby teeth in the nests indicated that the young stayed there after hatching, being fed and cared for by attentive parents until they were old enough to join the herd. The nest was a nursery, a place of safety and learning. For the ceratopsians, the horns and frills that seemed designed for defense against predators likely played an equally critical role in the social sphere. In the mating season, these structures would have become tools for display rather than combat. Males could have engaged in ritualized shoving matches, testing each other's strength without resorting to lethal goring, their magnificent headgear serving as a visual signal of health, age, and genetic fitness. The patterns and colors on their frills would have been a language, a way to recognize their own kind, to attract a mate, or to establish hierarchy within the herd without a single drop of blood being spilled. The fossil record, for all its silence, whispers of a world rich with interaction. It was a world of communication through sight and sound, of parents guarding their nests, of herds moving with a collective will, and of predators possibly coordinating their attacks. The dinosaurs were not solitary monsters but social creatures, their lives defined by the same fundamental needs for community, protection, and reproduction that govern the animal kingdom today. Their world thundered, not just with the steps of giants, but with the complex, unspoken bonds that held them together. The world of the dinosaurs was not perceived in silence and monochrome, but was a symphony of sensation, a tapestry woven from sights, sounds, and smells far beyond human experience. To understand these giants, one must venture beyond their bones and into the hollow spaces they left behind, the intricate architecture of their skulls and the subtle contours of their brain cavities. These fossilized molds, known as endocasts, preserve the shape and size of their brains and sensory organs, offering a ghostly blueprint of how they experience their world. It is here, in the negative space of bone, that the vivid sensory reality of the Mesozoic comes back to life. Vision was paramount, and the eyes of dinosaurs were marvels of evolutionary adaptation. In the skull of a large predator like Tyrannosaurus rex, the eye sockets are positioned forward, granting the overlap of visual fields that is the foundation of depth perception. This binocular vision was a critical tool for a hunter that needed to judge the precise distance to struggling prey. The size of the optic lobes in their brain casts suggests eyes capable of exceptional clarity and detail, likely able to spot movement across great distances. For them, the Cretaceous world was not a blur of green, but a sharp, focused landscape where a limping hadrosaur or a straying juvenile could be singled out from a herd a mile away. Their vision may have extended into the ultraviolet spectrum, seeing patterns on skin and feathers invisible to us, a hidden language of display and camouflage painted across their world. For the prey animals, the story was different. The skulls of many herbivores, like Triceratops and the hadrosaurs, show eyes set wide on the sides of the head. This granted them a panoramic, almost 360-degree field of view, a constant sweeping surveillance for danger. They could browse on ferns and cycads while simultaneously monitoring the tree line for the telltale movement of a lurking predator. They traded depth perception for the priceless advantage of early warning. Their world a widescreen panorama where a shadow falling in the periphery could mean the difference between life and death. The world through their eyes was flatter, but infinitely broader, a landscape of constant vigilance. The sense of smell was another powerful dimension of their existence. The evidence is etched in the bone itself, the complex scrolls of turbinate bones within the nasal passages, which would have been covered in olfactory epithelium, the tissue responsible for detecting odors. In some dinosaurs, like the tyrannosaurs, these nasal chambers were enormous. The olfactory bulbs of their brains, the regions dedicated to processing smell, were correspondingly massive, to a T. Rex, the world would have been a rich and layered map of scent. It could have detected the pheromones of a potential mate from miles away, followed the faint, decaying trail of a carcass over rugged terrain, or smelled the fear scent of a hidden prey animal. The air was not empty. It was a current of information, a narrative of who was nearby, what they were doing, and what had recently passed through. Hearing, too, played a crucial role. The structure of the inner ear, preserved in some exquisite fossils, reveals the range of frequencies different dinosaurs could perceive. The long, coiled cochlea of some species suggests an ability to hear low-frequency infrasound, the kind of sound that travels vast distances with little distortion. A sauropod heard on the move would have generated a deep, seismic rumble, a vibration felt through the feet as much as heard. This infrasonic communication could have allowed them to stay in contact over miles of dense forest, coordinating their movements across vast landscapes. For smaller social dinosaurs, higher frequency calls would have been used for close-range communication, the urgent alarm calls of a sentinel, the contented grunts of a feeding herd, the begging cheeps of hatchlings in a nest. Their world was far from silent. It was alive with a constant, subtle orchestra of calls and rumbles, a language of survival spoken in frequencies some of which we can never hear. To walk among them would have been to experience a world of overwhelming sensory intensity. The air, thick with the perfume of flowering plants and the musky scent of immense animals. The ground, trembling with the footfalls of giants. The air, humming with the low-frequency conversations of herds and the sharp, piercing cries of predators and pterosaurs. And the landscape, painted in colors and patterns visible only to their eyes, a world of hidden signals and stark clarity. They were not primitive creatures stumbling through a dull world, but sophisticated animals equipped with a battery of senses that allowed them to master their environment, to find food, avoid danger, and communicate in a rich, complex, and beautifully alien sensory realm. For over a century, the dinosaurs had lived in a world of gray. In museum halls and scientific illustrations, they were reconstructed as drab, leathery monsters, their forms powerful but their hues imagined as the muted tones of stone and dust. The palate of the Mesozoic was assumed to be lost forever, a secret that fossilization could not preserve. Then, in a quiet laboratory, a scientist peering through a powerful electron microscope saw something that would shatter this monochrome vision. On the surface of a fossilized feather from a small bird-like dinosaur, they found not just the impression of soft tissue, but the ghosts of the feathers themselves, microscopic, melanin-filled organelles called melanosomes, preserved in stunning detail for 150 million years. These tiny capsule-shaped structures were the key to a locked door. Their shape and density held the code for color. Long, sausage-shaped melanosomes indicated the presence of dark blacks and grays. Short, spherical ones suggested lighter pheomelanin, which could produce rusty reds, chestnut browns, and pale yellows. Their arrangement could even hint at iridescence, a shimmering metallic sheen created by the way light refracted through layers of neatly stacked melanosomes. The science of paleocolor was born, and with it the ability to paint the ancient world with its true, vibrant palette. The first subject to be unveiled was Sinosauropteryx, the small theropod that had first revealed the feathered enigma. Analysis of its tail showed bands of light and dark, a pattern of russet red and white rings, much like a raccoon's tail. Its back was a warm ginger brown, and a dark bandit-like mask ran across its eyes. This was no generic reptile. It was a creature of distinct and beautiful patterning, its colors likely serving as camouflage in the dappled light of its forest home or for display among its own kind. The gray world had just gained its first splash of fiery color. More revelations followed in rapid succession. Anchiornis, a four-winged dinosaur from the Jurassic, was found to have a predominantly gray body, a reddish-brown crest like a woodpecker's, and striking white feathers on its wings, accentuated with black spangles. It was a Jurassic dandy, a creature whose appearance was as complex and purposeful as any modern bird. Microraptor, another gliding theropod, was revealed to possess iridescent black plumage, its feathers shimmering with a blue and purple oil-slick sheen in the sunlight, a dazzling display for courtship or species recognition. The implications rippled far beyond the small feathered dinosaurs. If melanosomes could be found in one group, could they be found in others? The search began for these microscopic time capsules in the skin impressions of larger, scaly dinosaurs. While more elusive hints began to emerge, the scaly skin of Psittacosaurus, a small bipedal ceratopsian, was found to be countershaded, dark on top and light on its underside. This common form of camouflage, used by everything from deer to penguins, suggested it lived in a world of open light, where predators used visual cues to hunt, and blending into the background was a matter of life and death. The color of the past was no longer a matter of artistic license. It was a science, a direct window into the lives and environments of these animals. A dark back and light belly spoke of a life spent in sun-dappled forests. Complex patterns of stripes and spots hinted at a need for camouflage in specific habitats. Iridescent sheens and bold patches of color were almost certainly for display, for attracting mates, or for intimidating rivals. The dinosaurs were not gray giants. They were a riot of color and pattern, their world as visually complex and vibrant as any modern ecosystem. They communicated, they hid, they flirted, and they threatened in a language of color we are only just beginning to understand, transforming the Mesozoic from a silent monochrome film into a breathtaking full-color epic. The world of the dinosaurs was not a silent film, but a living symphony, a resonant landscape where the air itself thrummed with a language of survival written in sound. To imagine the Mesozoic is to fill it not just with the visual spectacle of giants, but with the deep visceral vibrations of their voices, a chorus of calls, roars, and songs that would have been as fundamental to their existence as the ground beneath their feet. These sounds, forever lost to time, are not entirely beyond recovery. They linger as echoes in the architecture of bone and in the behaviors of their living relatives, allowing us to reconstruct the possible soundscape of a vanished world. The most profound clues are locked in the fossilized skulls themselves. The structure of a dinosaur's ear and the shape of its respiratory tract hold the blueprints for its voice. For the great hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, the key was their extraordinary cranial crest, these hollow convoluted chambers, which looped over their heads in fantastic shapes, were not merely for show. They were natural resonators, intricate plumbing that could amplify and modulate sound. By blowing air through these chambers, a hadrosaur could have produced low-frequency trumpeting calls that carried for miles across the open floodplains. Each species' unique crest shape would have created a distinct sound, a sonic signature used to communicate with its herd, to warn of danger, or to issue challenges during the mating season. The air would have been filled with their haunting, resonant music, a sound both beautiful and alien. For the giant predators, the voice was likely an instrument of intimidation. The skull of Tyrannosaurus rex, with its massive deep nasal passages and large sinus cavities, suggests the capacity for a truly terrifying vocalization. It would not have been the high-pitched shriek of a movie monster, but a deep, infrasonic roar, a vibration felt in the chest as much as heard by the ears. This low-frequency sound could travel immense distances, penetrating dense forest and rolling across valleys, serving as a territorial marker that warned rivals and paralyzed prey with its sheer bone-shaking power. The roar of a T-Rex would have been less a sound and more a physical event, a wave of primal fear that announced the presence of the apex predator. The smaller, feathered theropods and early birds, likely contributed a more familiar cacophony. Based on their closest living relatives, birds and crocodilians, their world would have been filled with a variety of clicks, hisses, honks, and squawks. A dromaeosaur like velociraptor, with its complex social structure, may have used a repertoire of sharp, barking calls to coordinate pack hunting, its voice cutting through the undergrowth to signal the position of prey or to summon others to a kill. The first true birds, like Confuciusornis, might have filled the Jurassic and Cretaceous skies with chirps and warbles, their songs used for courtship and territory defense, much like their descendants do today. Beyond vocalizations, the Mesozoic soundscape was built on a foundation of movement. The passage of a sauropod herd was a symphony of percussion, the deep rhythmic thud of pillar-like legs striking the earth, the rustling crash of vegetation being stripped and consumed, the low groans of their immense bodies shifting and settling. The crack of a tail club from an angry ankylosaur would have been a sharp, percussive warning, like the sound of a tree splitting. The air hummed with the drone of giant insects and the leathery flap of pterosaur wings. It was a world alive with noise, a constant layered composition of life, communication and power, a resonant, thunderous world that, for all its silence now, was once the noisiest planet Earth has ever known. The great herbivores of the Mesozoic did not merely inhabit their world, they were shaped by it, engaged in a silent, ancient dance of coevolution with the very flora they consumed. This was a world where the plants were not passive victims, but active participants in an arms race of survival, developing defenses of toxin, thorn, and toughness to withstand the endless appetite of the giants, who in turn evolved ever more sophisticated ways to harvest, process, and derive nourishment from the green fortress around them. The menu of the Cretaceous was a bizarre and formidable feast. Towering conifers, like ancient redwoods and araucarias, offered a bounty of tough, resinous needles, a food source only accessible to the immense, sweeping necks of the sauropods. Lower down, the cycads spread their stiff, palm-like fronds, their tissues laced with potent neurotoxins and sharp spines to deter smaller browsers. Yet the great duck-billed hadrosaurs, with their incredible dental batteries, hundreds of teeth constantly grinding in a precise mortar and pestle motion, could pulp even the most defended cycad. Their livers and digestive systems evolved to neutralize the poisons that would have felled a lesser creature. The true revolution, however, was flowering. The sudden rise of the angiosperms in the Cretaceous introduced a new, softer, and more nutritious food source: broad-leaved trees, shrubs, and the first grasses. These plants traded the ancient defenses of poison and spine for a strategy of rapid growth and reproduction. They could be cropped easily, and their fruits and flowers offered concentrated packets of energy. In response, a new wave of herbivores evolved. The ceratopsians, with their parrot-like beaks, became expert at snipping through tough stems and leaves, while the low-slung ankylosaurs used their broad, flat mouths to graze on ferns and newly evolved flowering plants close to the ground, their bodies so well armored they could feed with near-total disregard for predators. This botanical arms race forged some of the most iconic dinosaurs. The interlocking teeth of the hadrosaurs were a direct answer to the abrasive silica found in new plants. The immensely long necks of the sauropods were a biological crane, engineered to reach the untouched canopies of the gymnosperms, a food source no other creature could exploit. Even the humble ginkgo tree, a living fossil from this age, survives today largely because its foul-smelling acidic seeds were unpalatable to most dinosaurs, a defensive strategy that worked so well it outlasted the giants themselves. The relationship was not one-sided. The plants used the dinosaurs as agents of seed dispersal. The hard pits of fruits were swallowed whole, passing through the vast fermenting guts of a hadrosaur or titanosaur to be deposited miles away, encased in a packet of fertile fertilizer. The constant pruning by herbivores may have encouraged plants to grow bushier and produce more leaves or fruit, a form of prehistoric cultivation driven by appetite. The world of the plant-eaters was a complex, reciprocal partnership, a slow, patient dialogue between consumer and consumed. that shaped the very landscape, turning it into a dynamic, ever-changing garden where every new leaf, every new thorn, and every new tooth was a move in a game of life that had been playing for millions of years. The hunt was a brutal calculus of energy, risk, and opportunity, and the great theropods of the Mesozoic were its master mathematicians. Their world was not one of mindless slaughter, but of finely tuned strategies, each predator an evolutionary specialist in a particular form of violence. The evidence of their methods is not written in blood, long since washed away, but in the geometry of their skeletons, the wear patterns on their teeth, and the silent stories told by the bones of their prey. From the swift, cunning ambusher to the relentless, enduring pursuer, each hunter was a perfect instrument for its chosen form of death. The ambush predator was a creature of patience and explosive power. It did not chase, it materialized. Allosaurus, lurking in the dense fern brakes lining a Jurassic river, was the epitome of this strategy. Its anatomy was built for the sudden, overwhelming strike, powerful leg muscles coiled beneath its body, ready to launch it forward in a burst of speed too quick for its prey to react. Its skull, strong but relatively lightweight, was studded with blade-like teeth designed not for crushing, but for slicing. It would aim for the neck or the flanks of an unsuspecting stegosaur or juvenile sauropod, delivering a devastating hemorrhaging bite before retreating to let shock and blood loss do its work. The element of surprise was its greatest weapon, and the landscape, the thickets, the river bends, the forest shadows was its hunting blind. In stark contrast was the pursuit predator, the endurance hunter. This was the strategy of the later tyrannosaurs and some dromaeosaurs. Their bodies were engines of efficiency, built for distance rather than sprint. Long, slender limbs, a more upright posture, and a respiratory system likely enhanced with air sacs allowed them to maintain a steady, loping run for miles. They would have singled out a weaker member of a herd, the old, the young, the injured, and simply outlasted it, their relentless pace slowly wearing down their quarry until it stumbled from exhaustion, too tired to even defend itself. Their bite was the coup de grace, a bone-crushing finish to a marathon of attrition. This method required immense stamina and a keen eye for vulnerability, turning the hunt into a test of will as much as strength. Then there were the opportunists, the masters of the free meal. The giant, powerful jaws of T-Rex, capable of generating enough force to pulverize bone, were as much a tool for scavenging as for killing. A carcass, whether felled by another predator, disease or accident, was a treasure trove of calories. By crushing bone and consuming the marrow within, a tyrannosaur could access nutrients that other scavengers could not, turning a picked-over skeleton into a feast. The evidence is in the coprolites, fossilized dung filled with fragments of partially digested bone. Their highly developed sense of smell would have acted like a dinner bell, leading them to carrion from miles away. In the harsh economy of the Cretaceous, a talent for scavenging could be just as valuable as prowess in the hunt. How do we know? The proof is etched into the fossil record itself. Healed bite marks on the bones of prey animals tell us which attacks were survived and where predators typically struck. The shed teeth of theropods, found scattered around potential kill sites, speak of violent struggles where teeth were broken and lost. Trackways sometimes showed the path of a predator converging on that of its prey, the strides lengthening as the chase began. The very design of their bodies, the binocular vision for depth perception, the specialized teeth for slicing or crushing, the leg proportions for sprinting or endurance, are all silent testaments to their chosen roles in the ancient drama of predator and prey. They were not monsters but specialists, each a unique and terrifying solution to the oldest problem in the world, how to eat. Beneath the thunderous drama of predator and prey, a quieter, ceaseless industry hummed, the world of the scavengers and the clean-up crews. While the great theropods made the kills and the herbivores shaped the forests, it was the smaller, often overlooked denizens of the Mesozoic that performed the essential, unsung work of recycling. They were the sanitarians of their age, the consumers of waste and decay, ensuring that no energy was lost, that death nourished new life, and that the great cycle of the ecosystem continued, uninterrupted and efficient. The first to arrive were often the insects, drawn by scent molecules carried on the wind. Clouds of flies, some with wingspans as wide as a human hand, would descend upon a carcass within hours, their buzzing a low, eager drone. They laid their eggs in the softening flesh, and soon the body would seethe with masses of carrion beetles and their larvae, working in a frenzy of consumption to break down the organic matter. Over days, the work of these tiny but innumerable decomposers would reduce tons of muscle and sinew to bone, their relentless activity a fundamental process of nutrient return, enriching the soil and completing the circle that began with a sauropod cropping a cycad frond. But the insects did not work alone. The small, swift theropods, often dismissed as mere opportunists, played a critical role. Dog-sized dromaeosaurs, their keen eyes missing nothing, were quick to investigate any sign of death. They would dart in to tear strips of meat from a carcass too large for the insects to claim, their sharp, curved claws and teeth perfect for this work of butchery. They were the middle managers of decay, capable of opening up a carcass and making it accessible to a host of smaller organisms, their presence a constant at the edges of any kill site or natural death. The true specialists of the cleanup crew, however, were the pterosaurs. While some hunted fish or preyed on small animals, many species were dedicated scavengers. With their incredible soaring ability, they could patrol vast territories, their sharp eyes scanning the landscape for the telltale dark shape of a carcass or the circling concentration of other scavengers that signaled a meal. They would glide down on silent, leathery wings to jostle for position on the ground, using their long, often toothless beaks to expertly pick clean the bones of anything the larger dinosaurs left behind. They were the vultures of their time, essential aerial spotters and consumers in the economy of death. Even the rivers and lakes had their own custodians. Freshwater rays and small greedy fish would swarm the body of any dinosaur that died in or near the water, their sharp teeth nibbling away at the soft tissues. In the oceans, the role fell to ammonites, crustaceans, and the relentless countless numbers of scavenging fish that could reduce a mosasaur carcass to a clean skeleton in a matter of days, their work ensuring the seas remained clear of rotting waste. This world of scavengers was a hierarchy of efficiency, a seamless transfer of energy from the largest life forms to the smallest. A fallen titanosaur was not a tragedy but a bounty, a sudden concentrated resource that could sustain entire ecosystems for weeks. It would feed insects, which fed small lizards and mammals, which in turn were prey for smaller theropods. Nothing was wasted. The final act was left to the bacteria and fungi, which slowly broke down the last fragments of collagen in the bones themselves, until all that remained was the mineral framework, ready to be buried and preserved as a fossil, a monument not just to the animal that lived, but to the legions of unseen creatures that ensured its death gave life to the world it left behind. Isolation is the great sculptor of the strange, the quiet force that carves away the ordinary, and leaves behind the bizarre and magnificent. When rising seas flooded continental shelves or volcanic peaks punched through the ocean's surface, they created isolated laboratories of evolution, islands where the normal rules of size and form were suspended. In these sealed worlds cut off from the genetic flow of the mainland, dinosaurs embarked on evolutionary experiments that would have been impossible anywhere else, giving rise to creatures of paradoxical scale. Titans shrunk to dwarves and hunters swollen to giants. The most famous of these experiments unfolded on Hatseg Island, a lost landmass in the Cretaceous Tethys Sea, where the remains of its unique inhabitants tell a story of profound miniaturization. Here the sauropods, those leviathans of the mainland, were subjected to the relentless pressures of limited resources. A large body requires immense amounts of food, a luxury not afforded on an island with finite space. Over generations, natural selection favored smaller sizes. The result was Magurasaurus, a titanosaur that stood no taller than a large horse, a dwarfed descendant of giants whose ancestors would have towered over it. Its bones were lighter, its appetite modest, a perfect adaptation to an island world where the highest foliage was within easy reach and the threats were scaled to match. But the same isolation that shrank the giants had the opposite effect on other lineages. Freed from the competition of larger mainland predators, certain theropods found themselves in a world ripe for domination. With no enormous allosaurs or tyrannosaurs to challenge them, these island hunters began to grow, filling the vacant apex predator niche. On the same Hatzig Island, the modest-sized dromaeosaurs of the mainland evolved into Hatzigopteryx, a monstrous Azhdarchid pterosaur with a wingspan nearing 12 meters and a robust, fearsome beak capable of tackling the island's dwarfed sauropods. It was a case of island gigantism, where a creature from a typically smaller-bodied group ballooned to unprecedented size, becoming the terror of its isolated domain. Other islands fostered their own unique wonders. On the land mass that would become modern-day Sicily and Malta, the bones of a giant flightless swan were found, a bird that had grown large and terrestrial in the absence of mammalian competitors. In Transylvania, a strange, stocky hadrosaur named Telmatosaurus evolved, its body shaped by the peculiar pressures of its island home. These were not failed imitations of their mainland cousins, but brilliant bespoke adaptations, each species a unique solution to the challenges and opportunities of an isolated existence. The world of these island dwarfs and giants was one of strange contrasts. A herd of pony-sized sauropods might thunder through a forest of strangely stunted cycads, their small size belying their immense ancestry, while a truly colossal raptor, grown fat on the lack of competition, watched from a cliffside. It was a topsy-turvy ecosystem, a place where the familiar was made alien by the powerful, distorting lens of isolation. These islands were evolution's workshops, where the process was accelerated and exaggerated, producing a menagerie of creatures that prove the only constant in nature is its breathtaking capacity for inventive radical change. In the sweltering river deltas of Cretaceous North Africa, a predator unlike any other ruled the murky waterways. Spinosaurus, the spine lizard, was a paradox in flesh and bone, a theropod dinosaur of staggering size that seemed to have turned its back on the land. Its elongated crocodilian snout bristled with conical teeth, perfect for snagging slippery fish, and its torso was crowned by a magnificent sail of skin stretched over neural spines taller than a man. For decades, it was known only from fragmentary remains, a ghost on the edges of paleontology, its life a subject of fierce and enduring debate. Was it an aquatic hunter, a semi-aquatic wader, or something else entirely? An evolutionary experiment so bizarre it defies easy categorization. The discovery of more complete specimens in the early 21st century only deepened the mystery. The new fossils revealed an animal built for a life intimately tied to water. Its bones were dense and without the air sacs common in other theropods, an adaptation seen in animals like hippos and penguins that provides ballast for sinking and swimming. Its nostrils were repositioned high on its skull, allowing it to breathe while mostly submerged. Its hind limbs were surprisingly short and powerful, perhaps functioning as paddles for propulsion, while its long muscular tail, recently understood to have a flexible paddle-like tip, could have undulated side to side like a crocodile's, generating powerful thrust in the water. This was not the anatomy of a terrestrial pursuit predator, but of a creature that hunted from the rivers. Yet, the debate rages on. Could such a massive animal truly have been a capable swimmer? Its immense sail, a structure that would have acted like a sail in the literal sense, would have been a liability in strong currents, catching the water and making precise maneuvering difficult. Some scientists propose it was a wader, not a swimmer, using its long arms and deadly claws to grapple with large fish from the shallows, its sail serving as a display structure or a thermal regulator under the fierce African sun. Its diet, evidenced by fossilized stomach contents and tooth wear, confirms a piscivorous lifestyle, but did it also hunt pterosaurs or small dinosaurs on the riverbanks, using its size to ambush them from the water's edge? The environment itself adds another layer of complexity. The Kem beds of Morocco, where Spinosaurus is found, depict a vast river system teeming with life, massive coelacanths, lungfish, sawfish, and even other predatory dinosaurs. This was a world of intense competition, and Spinosaurus's unique adaptations may have been its key to dominating a specific, rich ecological niche that no other predator could fully exploit. It was the river's own special kind of monster, a specialist in a world of generalists. The mystery of Spinosaurus endures because it challenges the very definition of a dinosaur. It pushes the boundaries of what we thought these animals could be, showing a lineage that boldly adapted to a semi-aquatic life in a way no other large theropod did. It is a reminder that evolution is not a straight path but a branching tree of endless experimentation, and that some of its most fascinating creations are those that defy our simplest labels. Spinosaurus remains an enigma swimming in the deep, dark waters of prehistory, its true nature as elusive and fluid as the rivers it once called home, far beyond the blue veil of Earth's atmosphere. In the cold, silent expanse where the sun's light was a constant, unforgiving glare, a mountain of stone and iron continued its ancient, unwavering journey. For millions of years it had traveled the void, a solitary wanderer on a path dictated by gravity's immutable laws. Now that path intersected with a world lush with life, a world unaware that its destiny was rushing toward it at over 40,000 miles per hour. The asteroid, a fragment of the solar system's violent birth, was closing the final fatal distance. It did not travel with malice, but with the blind, indifferent force of celestial mechanics, its approach as silent and inevitable as the turning of the galaxies. Beneath it, the world carried on in the thunderous rhythm that had defined the Cretaceous. In the swampy deltas of what would one day be called North America, a Tyrannosaurus rex, its hide still damp from a morning spent cooling in a river, sniffed the humid air, its keen senses filtering the scent of blooming magnolias from the musky odor of a herd of Edmontosaurus browsing nearby. The great predator's world was one of immediate concerns: the ache of an old injury in its leg, the gnawing hunger in its gut, the calculation of risk versus reward. The sky above was a familiar dome of hazy blue, streaked with high clouds, holding no portent, no warning of the fire that approached from beyond its grasp. Across the globe, the planet was a patchwork of volcanic fury and climatic shift. In the region that would become India, titanic volcanoes spewed incandescent lava and belched endless clouds of sulfurous gas and ash into the upper atmosphere, a protracted eruption that had already begun to strain the global ecosystem. The climate was warmer, the seas higher, and the air itself carried a faint, acrid tang that irritated the lungs of the great reptiles. It was a world under a slow geological pressure, a background stress that weakened the resilience of life but did not break it. The dinosaurs, in their magnificent diversity, had endured such changes before. They adapted, they migrated, they thrived. Life, as it always had, found a way. On a fern-covered plain, a herd of triceratops moved with a ponderous grace, their great frills casting shifting patterns of shadow on the ground as they turned their heads to watch for the smaller, feathered predators that stalked the undergrowth. The air was filled with the low, resonant calls of the herd, the buzz of giant dragonflies, and the rustle of cycad fronds in a warm breeze. It was an afternoon like any other in the long reign of the dinosaurs, a tableau of power and peace that had remained essentially unchanged for over 150 million years. The volcanoes rumbled, the continents drifted, and the asteroid drew nearer, its shadow not yet fallen upon a world that had forgotten how to be afraid. The final day had begun, and no one knew to say goodbye. The end did not arrive with a slow darkening or a distant rumble, but as a second sun igniting in the western sky. It was a light that did not illuminate but consumed, a silent, expanding fireball that outshone the day and cast the world in a searing, impossible white. For a fraction of a second, the atmosphere itself was torn apart, and then the sound arrived, not a sound but a physical annihilation of silence, a pressure wave of pure force that flattened everything in its path. The asteroid, 6 miles wide, struck the shallow sea off the Yucatan Peninsula with the energy of 1 billion atomic bombs, vaporizing rock and water instantly, punching a crater 100 miles across into the continental shelf. The firestorm began immediately. The superheated ejecta from the impact, millions of tons of molten rock and vaporized asteroid, were blasted high above the atmosphere. For a terrifying moment, this incandescent debris hung in the void like a crown of hellfire before raining back down across the entire globe. Everywhere, the sky turned into a furnace. The falling spherules of glass and rock glowed with the heat of re-entry, striking the Earth not as particles but as a continuous, worldwide meteor shower of unimaginable intensity. Forests ignited not tree by tree, but continent by continent, in a simultaneous explosive combustion. The very air became unbreathable, superheated to oven-like temperatures, scorching lungs and igniting fur and feathers. The world was baked in an instant. Beneath the cataclysm from above, the planet's crust convulsed. The energy of the impact traveled through the Earth's mantle as a seismic shockwave of incomprehensible magnitude, orders of magnitude greater than any earthquake in human history. The ground buckled and rolled in great solid waves, splitting open in fissures that swallowed entire ecosystems. Mountain ranges shuddered, and volcanoes already active were sent into apocalyptic paroxysms of eruption, adding their own fury to the hellish atmosphere. The very sound of the impact, a deep fundamental groan of tortured rock, was the planet itself screaming. Then came the water. The initial impact in the shallow sea displaced trillions of gallons of ocean water, sending a series of tsunamis radiating outward. These were not waves as known to any creature. They were moving mountains of water, thousands of feet high, traveling at the speed of a jet aircraft. They scoured the coastlines of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic, not merely flooding the land but pulverizing it, stripping away soil, rock, and life down to the bedrock. They swept inland for hundreds of miles, carrying a churning slurry of mud, debris, and the shattered bodies of marine reptiles, dinosaurs, and plants, before finally receding and leaving behind a barren, unrecognizable world of sludge and wreckage. Within hours, the vibrant, noisy, teeming world of the Cretaceous was gone. In its place was a silent, smoldering planet. The skies were blacked out by a global shroud of ash, soot, and vaporized sulfur, beginning a long descent into darkness and cold. The great herds were ash. The forests were charcoal. The rulers of the land, sea, and air had been unmade not by arrival, nor by a slow decline, but by a single indifferent blow from the cosmos. The age of thunder was over, its final note a silent, expanding ring of dust and fire that marked not just an extinction, but the end of one world and the grim, empty beginning of another. The firestorm passed, leaving behind a world cloaked in a suffocating, particulate darkness. The sky, once a dome of blue or hazy white, became a perpetual, impenetrable ceiling of ash and soot, blotting out the sun and casting the entire planet into a deep, chilling twilight. This was no ordinary night. It was a global shroud, a burial veil for an entire era. The heat of the impact and the global conflagration had seared the atmosphere, but now, with the sun's life-giving rays unable to penetrate the toxic haze, the great freeze began. The long winter had settled over the Earth, a silent, lethal aftermath to the violence of the last day. Temperatures plummeted with a rapidity that life had never experienced. The lingering heat from the fires and the impact dissipated into the void of space, unchecked by any greenhouse effect. The world grew cold, then frigid. Inland seas, once warm and teeming, began to develop a skin of ice along their shores. The lush tropical forests that had lined the coasts were now frozen wastelands, their blackened, skeletal trees encased in a rime of frost. The drop was catastrophic and universal. From the poles to the equator, a planet-wide refrigeration that ignored all previous climate zones. The very air became a sharp, crystalline enemy, leaching warmth from every living thing. Then the rains began. Not the nourishing rains of the Cretaceous, but a toxic, acidic deluge. The immense quantities of sulfur dioxide and other gases blasted into the stratosphere by the impact mixed with water vapor, creating a global shower of sulfuric and nitric acid. This corrosive precipitation fell for years, scouring the barren landscapes, leaching what little nutrients remained from the scorched soil, and turning the top layers of the ocean into a poisonous, acidic broth. The few freshwater sources that remained became deadly, their pH levels plummeting, killing any aquatic life that had survived the initial tsunamis and the sudden cold. On land, the devastation was absolute. The photosynthetic machinery of the planet ground to a halt. With no sunlight, the great forests died, their remains either burned or frozen. The ferns, the cycads, the flowering plants, all withered and decayed in the endless gloom. The herbivores, those magnificent giants that had depended on this endless bounty, starved en masse. Their immense bodies, once symbols of power, became liabilities, requiring caloric intakes that the dead world could no longer provide. They fell where they stood, their skeletons soon buried by ash and dust. The predators and scavengers, in turn, found a brief, grim feast in the countless corpses, but soon that too was gone. The circle of life was broken, replaced by a silent, expanding circle of death. The oceans fared no better. The phytoplankton, the invisible foundation of the marine food web that relied on sunlight, died off completely. The great chains of life that supported ammonites, marine reptiles, and countless fish species collapsed from the bottom up. The acid rain further poisoned the surface waters, while the darkness and cold reached into the depths. The great mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, the rulers of the seas, starved or succumbed to the shifting chemistry of their environment. Their bodies sank into the deepening silts, joining the skeletons of their terrestrial cousins in the great global tomb. The world was now a cold, dark, and acidic prison, a planet-sized engine of extinction that left no ecosystem untouched, no niche unscarred. The reign of the dinosaurs was over, ended not with a slow decline, but extinguished in the deep, silent freeze of an endless winter. In the crushing silence of the long winter, beneath a sky that had forgotten the sun, life did not end, it retreated. The world was a graveyard of giants, a frozen monument to a lost dynasty. But in the deepest burrows, the most sheltered crevices, and the darkest mud-choked riverbeds, a tenacious few endured. They were the survivors, not by strength or majesty, but by obscurity, flexibility, and a simple, stubborn refusal to vanish. While the Titans had ruled the day, these smaller, humbler creatures had mastered the art of existing in the margins, a strategy that now became the key to the future of the planet. The mammals, for so long mere shadows in the world of reptiles, found their moment in the eternal night. Small, furry, and warm-blooded, they were already adapted to a life of hiding and foraging in the dark. Their high metabolisms, once a liability in a world of abundant, easy-to-find prey, now allowed them to remain active in the bitter cold that left larger, cold-blooded reptiles sluggish and doomed. They huddled in intricate burrows, living on hidden stores of seeds, tunneling insect larvae, and the frozen carcasses of the fallen giants. Their world was one of scent and touch, of whiskers brushing against cold earth, and the constant quiet need to find just enough energy to survive another endless day. They were the inheritors, not by conquest, but by perseverance. In the air, the true dinosaurs had not been entirely erased. Their direct descendants, the birds, weathered the cataclysm. Small, feathered, and capable of flight, they could escape the worst of the ground-level cold and seek out scattered pockets of food. Their beaks could crack hardy seeds that survived the frost, and their ability to roost in dense clusters conserved precious warmth. They were living reminders of the world that had been, their feathers a legacy of the Mesozoic, now serving as perfect insulation against the global winter. They flitted through the gloom like ghosts, their songs silenced, their forms reduced to survival itself. The waters too held their champions of endurance. Crocodilians, ancient relatives of the dinosaurs, survived by sinking into a state of torpor in the mud at the bottom of rivers and lakes. Their metabolism slowed to a near standstill. They could wait out the years of darkness and cold, requiring little oxygen and no food, a strategy of profound patience honed over hundreds of millions of years. In the oceans, Some species of sharks, with their cartilaginous skeletons and generalist diets, prowled the depths, below the worst of the acidified surface waters. Turtles, with their slow metabolisms and protective shells, hibernated in the muck. They were the great waiters, creatures of profound resilience, who simply outlasted the disaster. The survivors were united not by power, but by a suite of humble adaptations. Small size which required less food, the ability to burrow or hide from the worst conditions, diets that were varied and opportunistic, and for many the gift of warm-bloodedness. They were the generalists in a world that had been ruled by specialists, and when the specialized world collapsed, the generalists found a way. They clung to life in a frozen, simplified world, a handful of threads holding the tapestry of the biosphere together. They were the quiet, unassuming custodians of the future, waiting in the cold and the dark for the world to heal, ready to step into the light when the sun finally broke through the ash and begin the story anew. The dust settled. The long winter's grip began, imperceptibly at first, to loosen. The relentless global shroud of ash and soot which had turned day into night and summer into an eternal freeze slowly started to dissipate. It did not vanish in a dramatic clearing, but thinned like a fading bruise, allowing the first faint grayish light to filter through to the planet's surface. But the light revealed a world unrecognizable. The great thunderous symphony of the Cretaceous was over. In its place reigned a profound, deafening silence, broken only by the whisper of a cold wind over bones that were not yet stone. The landscapes were empty cathedrals. The vast fern prairies and cycad forests were gone, replaced by a monochrome expanse of gray ash and blackened skeletal stumps. The great migratory highways, once worn deep by the passage of titanosaur herds, were now filled with wind-blown dust, their purpose erased. River valleys, scoured clean by apocalyptic tsunamis, were now barren gullies cutting through a silent world. The inland seas had receded, their shores littered with the immense, half-buried skeletons of mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, their bones bleaching under a sun that still struggled to break through the haze. The air, once thick with the scent of vegetation and the musky odor of dinosaurs, now carried only the smell of ozone, cold stone and dust. The bones were everywhere. They lay in tangled, heartbreaking heaps in the ancient riverbeds where panicked herds had been swept away. They were scattered across the uplands where lone hunters had fallen, never to rise again. They were piled in the ossuaries of forest floors where entire ecosystems had been flash incinerated. A triceratops skull, its mighty horns pointing uselessly at the ashen sky. The immense serrated tooth of a tyrannosaurus, lying inches from the fractured spine of a hadrosaur it would never consume. The delicate bird-like skeleton of a troodontiid, curled in its burrow as if in sleep. They were not yet fossils, but recent death on a planetary scale, a stark and sobering record of a kingdom's final hour. Life, in its most rudimentary forms, was already beginning the slow work of reclamation. Lichens, the hardiest of pioneers, spread like a gray crust over the bones and the bare rock, secreting acids that would begin to break stone into soil. Wind-blown spores of ferns found purchase in the ash, their simple, tough fronds unfurling in the feeble light, the first green whispers in a world of gray. In the sheltered lee of a fallen dinosaur's ribcage, a cluster of mushrooms fed on the last remnants of flesh, their pale caps a silent testament to the endless cycle of decay and renewal. The world was not dead, it was empty, waiting. This was the silence after the thunder. It was the quiet of a stage after the actors had taken their final bow, leaving behind only the props and the sets. The age of giants had passed, its echoes fading into the deep time from which it had emerged. The planet, scarred and chilled, began its long convalescence. The immense haunting presence of the dinosaurs was gone, leaving behind only their bones and a world that felt too large, too still, and too quiet, holding its breath for the next act to begin. The world had forgotten them. For 66 million years, the bones of the great lords of the earth lay buried in mud and stone, their memory erased by the slow, patient work of geology and time. Then, A new kind of animal walked upon the land, one that walked upright, with hands that could grasp and a mind that could wonder. These early humans, clad in furs against the Pleistocene chill, were the first to stumble upon the petrified remains of a world they could never have imagined. They found them weathering out of riverbanks, protruding from eroding cliffs, lying exposed on the desert floor like the discarded limbs of gods or demons. What did they see when they looked upon the massive, unfamiliar shapes? A thigh bone, longer than a man is tall, emerging from a gravel bed, a string of vertebrae, each one the size of a cooking pot, trailing into a hillside, a tooth, serrated and as long as a hand axe, lying among the flint chips of a tool-making site. These were not the bones of any mammoth, cave bear or giant elk they knew. They were too big, too strangely shaped, too utterly alien. They belonged to no creature that walked their world. They must have woven stories around these monstrous remains. In the absence of science, myth rushed in to fill the void. The massive hollow leg bones of sauropods might have been seen as the pipes of ancestral giants, their marrow replaced by stone. The fearsome skull of a ceratopsian, with its great frill and horns, could easily become the skeleton of a monstrous demonic bull that had terrorized the first people. The immense sharp-toothed jaws of a theropod might be the remains of a great dragon or a terrible primeval wolf that had been turned to stone by a shaman's power or a hero's cunning. These bones became part of the landscape of their belief. They were talismans of power, objects of awe and fear. A tribe might settle near a cliff face rich with fossils, believing the stone bones of the ancient beasts protected them or housed the spirits of powerful ancestors. A shaman might wear a polished dinosaur tooth on a thong around his neck, a conduit to a more savage, primordial time. They might explain the presence of marine reptile skeletons on a high mountain ridge as evidence of a great flood that had once covered the world, leaving the sea monsters stranded as the waters receded. They lived in a world where the past was not a linear timeline but a layered reality, where the age of giants felt recent, just beyond the veil of memory. The ground beneath their feet was not just earth, it was a graveyard of incomprehensible ages, and the bones that emerged were messages from a time of deeper magic and greater terrors. They were the first fossil finders, not scientists but storytellers, who looked upon the evidence of a lost world and saw not extinct reptiles, but the physical proof of their own legends, the stone bones of the monsters that had haunted the dawn of time. For centuries, the giant bones were the stuff of legend, the remains of giants, dragons, and biblical beasts. They were curiosities, feared or revered, but never understood. Then, in the quarries and coastal cliffs of 19th-century England, a new way of thinking began to take root. The world was ancient, far older than any scripture had described, and its past was written in the stone beneath our feet. This was the dawn of paleontology, a science born from curiosity, rivalry, and the slow, painstaking work of reassembling a lost world from its shattered fragments. The first glimmers of understanding came not from a single discovery, but from a shift in perspective. Geologists like William Smith began to map the rock layers of Britain, realizing that they were laid down in a specific order, each stratum containing a unique assemblage of fossils. Deeper rocks held stranger, more primitive life forms. This was the principle of faunal succession, the idea that life had changed over time, that the earth had a history, and that fossils were the key to reading it. The stone was not just a random jumble, it was a chronological archive, and the bizarre bones within it were not monsters but ancient life. The figure who gave this new science its first celebrity was Mary Anning, a self-taught fossil hunter scouring the treacherous cliffs of Lyme Regis. With a keen eye and relentless determination, she unearthed the first complete skeletons of creatures that defied all classification: ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and pterosaurs. Her finds, sold to wealthy collectors and academics, were the physical proof that the world had once been ruled by sea dragons and flying reptiles, beings unlike anything in the modern world. She worked in the shadow of societal prejudice, her contributions often overlooked by the gentleman scientists of the day, but her fossils were the undeniable evidence that forced the scientific establishment to confront the reality of a prehistoric world. That establishment was soon embroiled in its own drama, the bone wars of the American West. Rival paleontologists Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope, fueled by ambition and mutual animosity, raced to uncover the most spectacular fossils. They funded lavish expeditions into the Badlands, where their teams dynamited hillsides and fought over prize specimens. Their reckless competition was ethically fraught, but it yielded an astonishing bounty. The first skeletons of Allosaurus, Stegosaurus, Triceratops, and Diplodocus were pulled from the ground, crated, and shipped back east. The American West was revealed as a vast graveyard of giants, and the public imagination was set ablaze with visions of a lost world of monsters. In museum halls, these scattered bones began to be reassembled. The painstaking work of cleaning, cataloging, and mounting turned chaotic piles of rock and bone into the majestic skeletons that still inspire awe today. Scientists debated posture, diet, and behavior, slowly transforming the dragons of myth into animals that had lived, breathed, and died. The word dinosaur, terrible lizard, was coined by Sir Richard Owen, who recognized these creatures as a distinct subclass of reptiles, though his vision of them as slow, sluggish, and cold-blooded would later be challenged. The birth of paleontology was more than a scientific revolution. It was an expansion of human consciousness. It revealed a past of unimaginable depth and complexity, a world that had thrived and vanished long before humans walked the earth. It taught humility, showing that our species was a recent arrival in a story that had been unfolding for hundreds of millions of years. The first paleontologists, with their hammers, brushes, and burgeoning curiosity, were the translators of this deep time, patiently piecing together the silent, stony language of the lost world of dinosaurs, one bone at a time. The arid badlands of the American West, once the domain of titans, became the stage for a new kind of hunt, one driven not by hunger, but by human ambition, ego, and an insatiable thirst for discovery. The late 19th century ignited the great dinosaur rush, a frenzied, often ruthless competition to pry the bones of the Mesozoic from their stone tombs and claim the glory of naming new species. It was a period of high drama, where science collided with spectacle, and the silent giants became prizes in a battle between two brilliant, bitter rivals, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. The spark was lit by the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, which cut through fossil-rich strata never before accessible. Reports trickled back east of massive bones weathering out of the hillsides, tales that fired the imaginations of academics and the public alike. Marsh and Cope, once cordial colleagues, transformed into arch-nemesis, each determined to outdo the other in the sheer volume and spectacle of their finds. They became generals in a paleontological war, hiring teams of bone hunters, often former scouts and cowboys, and dispatching them into the rugged wilderness with instructions to secure everything by any means necessary. The field was a chaotic and often dangerous frontier. Rival teams shadowed each other, spying on dig sites, bribing workers for information, and even resorting to sabotage, smashing fossils they could not collect to prevent them from falling into the other's hands. Under the blistering sun, men used picks, dynamite, and plaster to extract the fragile bones from the stubborn rock, shipping them back east in crates by the trainload. The science was often crude, the methods destructive, but the results were staggering. The world was introduced to a parade of prehistoric marvels: the plated Stegosaurus, the horned Triceratops, the towering Apatosaurus, and the fearsome Allosaurus, each new skeleton a victory in the ongoing feud. The rivalry reached its peak in the Como Bluff region of Wyoming, a site so rich in fossils it was dubbed a dinosaurian Golgotha. Here, the two factions established warring camps, digging trenches mere miles apart. The air was thick with tension and the dust of excavation. At night, by the light of kerosene lamps, the workers wrote coded messages to their patrons, detailing the day's finds and the movements of the enemy. It was a gold rush mentality applied to bones, a mad scramble for scientific prestige that played out in a landscape of breathtaking desolation. Despite the chaos, the great dinosaur rush irrevocably transformed paleontology. It flooded museums with specimens, giving the world its first true glimpse of the diversity and grandeur of the dinosaurian age. It captured the public's imagination, turning the prehistoric past into a source of wonder and excitement. And though it was born of vanity and conflict, it laid the groundwork for a more meticulous, respectful science to come. The giants, silent for eons, had once again become the center of a thunderous drama, their bones the currency in a war that, for all its folly, brought them back to life in the human mind. The quiet halls of museums and the dusty field notebooks of paleontologists were on the verge of a seismic shift, one not driven by a new fossil find, but by the hum of machines and the glow of computer screens. The study of dinosaurs, long reliant on the painstaking work of brushes and chisels, was being reborn through a suite of technologies that allowed scientists to see through stone, to model the impossible, and to interrogate fossils without ever touching them. This was the technological revolution, and it was transforming dusty bones into dynamic living creatures with a clarity never before imagined. The catalyst was the computed tomography scanner, the CT machine. Where once a rare fossil skull was a solid, enigmatic puzzle, now it could be digitally sliced into thousands of paper-thin cross-sections, the internal structures, the delicate labyrinth of the inner ear, the air sacs snaking through the vertebrae, the precise shape of the brain cavity, were revealed in perfect three-dimensional detail. For the first time, paleontologists could peer inside the brain case of a Tyrannosaurus rex and measure the size of its olfactory bulbs, confirming its legendary sense of smell. They could trace the sinuous airways of a hadrosaur's crest, modeling the resonant chambers that produced its low, trumpeting calls. The stone was no longer a barrier, it had become transparent. This digital dissection gave rise to the next great leap: biomechanical modeling. By applying the principles of engineering and physics to these precise 3D models, scientists could test long-standing hypotheses with rigorous quantitative analysis. They could calculate the bite force of a Carnotaurus by simulating the stresses on its skull. They could model the range of motion in the immense neck of a Diplodocus, determining whether it could truly rear up like a giraffe or was limited to sweeping side-to-side motions. They could even simulate the muscle attachments and joint movements to estimate the running speed of a velociraptor, turning speculation into data-driven conclusion. The dinosaurs were no longer static statues, they were becoming virtual entities whose capabilities could be tested in a digital laboratory. The revolution extended beyond the skeleton. Laser scanners could capture the exact topography of a fossil, creating a perfect digital replica that could be shared with researchers across the globe, preserving the original specimen from handling damage. Sophisticated software could then analyze these models for microscopic wear patterns on teeth, revealing the specifics of a dinosaur's diet, whether it crushed bone, sheared meat, or ground tough plants. Even the chemical composition of fossils was now a source of information. Mass spectrometers could detect isotopic signatures locked in the enamel of teeth, acting as a prehistoric GPS to trace migration routes and dietary changes over an animal's lifetime. The most profound impact was on the smallest scale. Powerful electron microscopes could now resolve features 1,000 times smaller than a human hair. It was this technology that allowed scientists to find the melanosomes, the pigment-bearing structures in fossilized feathers, unlocking the true colors of dinosaurs. This same microscopic scrutiny could identify medullary bone in the limbs of a Tyrannosaurus rex, a tissue only present in egg-laying females, providing the first direct evidence of gender in a non-avian dinosaur. The technological revolution was a cascade of new vision, from the planetary scale of migration down to the cellular level of biology, each innovation peeling back another layer of mystery and revealing the Mesozoic world in a light more vivid and true than ever before. The giants were stepping out of the shadows of guesswork and into the precise, illuminated world of science. The silence after the thunder was not an end, but a transition. The cataclysm that erased the giants from the earth did not extinguish their lineage entirely. In the shadows of that devastation, a single thread of the great dinosaurian tapestry endured, woven not from scale and thunder, but from feather and song. The proof of this unbroken lineage does not lie buried in stone, but hops on city sidewalks, soars on thermal currents, and sings from backyard trees. The birds are not mere descendants of dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs, the living, breathing testament to a world that never truly vanished, only changed its form. The evidence is etched into their very skeletons, a blueprint of ancestry that no amount of evolutionary modification can erase. The structure of a bird's hip, with its pubis bone pointing backward, is a direct inheritance from their theropod ancestors like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus. The wishbone, or furcula, that spring-like structure essential for flight, was first evolved by theropod dinosaurs for strength and mobility in their predatory strikes. Even the three-toed foot of a modern chicken, scaled down and adapted for perching, mirrors the lethal, grasping foot of its Cretaceous cousins. These are not analogous features developed through convergent evolution, they are homologous structures, the same bones reshaped by millions of years of selective pressure, a living anatomy lesson in dinosaurian heritage. This deep connection is confirmed at the most fundamental level, the genetic code. Molecular analysis has placed birds firmly within the theropod branch of the dinosaur family tree, their DNA a slightly altered version of the blueprint that once built monsters. The genes that govern the development of scales in reptiles are the very same genes, with slight modifications, that instruct the growth of feathers in birds. The genetic pathways for building a long, balancing tail were truncated to form the pygostyle that supports a bird's tail feathers. The biology is a palimpsest, with the ancient text of the dinosaur still clearly visible beneath the modern script of the bird. Their behaviors, too, are haunting echoes of a lost world. The complex nesting rituals of many birds, the meticulous construction of nests and the fierce defense of eggs and young, find their direct precursors in the fossilized nesting grounds of dinosaurs like Maiasaura and Oviraptor. The elaborate courtship displays of a bird of paradise, with its vibrant plumage and intricate dances, are a dramatic continuation of the visual signaling suggested by the extravagant crests and frills of their dinosaurian ancestors. Even the coordinated flocking of starlings, moving as a single fluid entity in the sky, mirrors the potential pack-hunting strategies of dromaeosaurs, a behavior written in the fossilized trackways of the Cretaceous. The past is not past, it is performing in our gardens and parks every day. To look at a bird is to see a dinosaur refined by time, stripped of its bulk and specialized for a life in the air, but still undeniably a product of that magnificent, terrible age. The hawk circling high overhead is a predator, its keen eyes and sharp talons, a direct inheritance from its raptor forebears. The ostrich sprinting across the African plain moves with the same powerful bipedal gait that once shook the earth. They are the survivors, the heirs to an empire of scale and feather, carrying the legacy of the thunder lizards, not as a forgotten secret, but as a living, breathing, and singing reality. The age of dinosaurs never ended, it simply learned to fly. From the hummingbird's iridescent hover to the albatross's oceanic glide, the modern world is a living gallery of dinosaurian adaptation, a breathtaking explosion of forms that trace their lineage back to the Mesozoic. This is not a diminished legacy, but a radiant diversification, a testament to the evolutionary potential locked within the theropod blueprint. The birds did not merely survive the extinction, they exploded across the vacant ecological stages of the planet, evolving into over 10,000 species that fill every conceivable niche, from the frozen poles to the densest rainforests, their success a direct continuation of the dinosaurian reign. In the canopies of tropical rainforests, parrots with powerful curved beaks crack open hard nuts, their precision and strength echoing the specialized feeding strategies of their Cretaceous ancestors. Woodpeckers, with their shock-absorbent skulls and long barbed tongues, excavate insects from tree bark, a niche that might once have been filled by small arboreal theropods. The long probing beaks of hummingbirds and sunbirds, perfectly co-evolved with specific flowers, are a graceful refinement of the predatory snouts of Maniraptor dinosaurs, transformed from instruments of capture to tools of delicate pollination. Each form is a variation on an ancient theme, a dinosaurian body plan endlessly repurposed for a new world. The mastery of the air represents the ultimate fulfillment of a potential first explored by feathered dinosaurs like Microraptor and Archaeopteryx. The albatross, with its immense wingspan, soars for thousands of miles without a single wing beat, harnessing the winds over the open ocean with an efficiency that even the largest pterosaurs could not match. The peregrine falcon tucks its wings and becomes a living bullet, stooping on its prey at speeds over 200 miles per hour, the most powerful aerial predator the world has ever seen, its dive a terrifying echo of a dromaeosaur's lethal pounce. Flight, in all its forms, from the frantic flutter of a sparrow to the effortless soar of a vulture, is the dinosaurs' final magnificent conquest of a domain they first tentatively explored. Even their social structures and intelligence speak of a deep, inherited complexity. Crows and ravens use tools, solve multi-step puzzles, and hold funerals for their dead, displaying a cognitive sophistication that rivals that of primates. The intricate, bower-building courtship rituals of bowerbirds, where males construct and decorate elaborate structures to attract mates, are displays of creativity and aesthetic sense that find their roots in the visual signaling of their dinosaurian forebears. The complex, learned songs of lyrebirds, capable of mimicking chainsaws and camera shutters alongside the calls of other species, are a communication system of stunning flexibility. This is not simple instinct, it is the vibrant, dynamic mind of the dinosaur, honed and expanded over 66 million years of continued evolution. They are everywhere, these living dinosaurs. They flock in city squares, nest under eaves, and patrol shorelines. Their feathers, once insulation for small hunters, now insulate them against Arctic cold and desert heat and propel them through the air and water. Their scales still cling to their legs, a direct link to a more ancient past. Their swift bipedal run is the same gait that once carried predators across fern prairies. To witness a flock of starlings wheel in a murmuration is to see the ghost of a dinosaur pack moving with a single mind. To hear the dawn chorus of songbirds is to listen to the descendants of the Mesozoic singing the world awake. They are the undeniable, feathered proof that the thunder never truly faded. It was merely translated into a chorus of a billion wings and voices, carrying the dinosaur legacy forward into a new age, vibrant, diverse, and forever among us. The bones no longer whispered only of the past. They now hummed with a tantalizing, terrifying promise of the future. In pristine laboratories, far from the dusty dig sites and museum halls, scientists held in their hands not just fossilized remnants, but something far more potent, trace amounts of organic material, proteins, and even fragmented strands of DNA, preserved against all odds in the marrow cavities of exceptionally preserved specimens. These were not merely clues to a lost world, they were potential keys to its resurrection. The question, once the realm of science fiction, now hovered in the realm of scientific possibility, charged with ethical fire and wonder. Could we bring the dinosaurs back? The scientific hurdles were, and remain, colossal. DNA, the blueprint of life, has a half-life. It decays, its intricate code breaking down into genetic gibberish over millennia. The idea of extracting a complete, viable dinosaur genome from a fossil was a fantasy. At best, researchers might recover shattered fragments, a handful of words from a library of genetic information that had been burned and scattered by time. The proposed solution was a workaround of breathtaking ambition, to use the closest living relatives, birds, as a template. By comparing the fragmented dinosaur DNA with the full genome of a chicken or an ostrich, scientists could theoretically identify the unique dinosaurian genes and, through a process of precise genetic editing, reverse engineer a bird embryo back into a form resembling its ancestral theropod state. It would not be true de-extinction, but a kind of guided atavism, awakening ancient traits slumbering in modern DNA. But even if the genetic puzzle could be solved, the biological challenges were staggering. How would one gestate a dinosaur? The egg of a bird is a Immerse precision instrument, perfectly calibrated for its own species. Inserting a modified dinosaur-like embryo into an ostrich egg would be an experiment in unprecedented uncertainty. Would the host mother's body recognize the embryo? Would the eggshell provide the correct gas exchange? Would the nutrients within be appropriate? The potential for suffering and grotesque failure was immense, a parade of biological horrors waiting to be unleashed in the name of curiosity. This led to the heart of the ethical maelstrom. Would such a creature even be a dinosaur, or a cruel chimera, an animal built from bird and guesswork, condemned to a life of confusion and probable ill health in a world it was never meant to inhabit? It would have no parents, no herd, no ecological context. Its instincts, shaped for a Cretaceous world of specific sounds, smells, and social structures, would be useless, leaving it a profoundly disoriented and likely distressed being. Creating life, only to consign it to a sterile enclosure for study, seemed a peculiar form of triumph, an act of creation inextricably linked to one of profound isolation. The debate spilled out of scientific journals and into the public sphere, a modern echo of the morality plays surrounding Prometheus or Dr. Frankenstein. Proponents argued for the unparalleled scientific value, the chance to study the physiology, behavior, and growth of a real living dinosaur would answer questions that fossils alone could never resolve. They spoke of the wonder it would inspire, a tangible connection to deep time that could revolutionize education and conservation. Opponents countered with the specter of ecological chaos, the astronomical cost that could be better spent preserving the species currently rushing toward extinction, and the fundamental hubris of the act. They asked if some doors once closed by time should remain closed, not because we lack the key, but because we lack the wisdom to handle what lies behind them. The question was no longer could we, but should we? A debate that forced a confrontation, not with ancient biology, but with the very nature of our own responsibility and our place in the long, unfinished story of life on Earth. The deserts still held their secrets. Under the relentless sun, where the wind carved the sandstone into pillars and arches, the Earth patiently cradled the bones of empires. Modern paleontologists, armed with tools far more precise than the dynamite and plaster of the bone wars, now worked with the delicate patience of surgeons. Their brushes were fine, their picks were laser-guided, and their eyes were aided by ground-penetrating radar that could see through layers of rock to the ghostly outlines of buried giants. The Badlands, once the stage for rivalrous spectacle, had become an open-air library, and every fossil was a volume in the epic of deep time, waiting to be carefully extracted and read. In the frozen wastes of Antarctica, where the air was a razor and the silence absolute, teams bundled against the cold, chipped at ice-cemented rock. Here, the fossils were not merely old, they were preserved in a state of suspended animation, the fine details of skin impressions and feather filaments kept pristine by the perpetual freeze. They unearthed the remains of polar dinosaurs, hardy hadrosaurs, and small, large-eyed theropods that had thrived in the endless twilight of the Cretaceous polar circle. Each bone, each tooth, was a testament to resilience, a clue to how life could endure in the most extreme environments, rewriting the story of dinosaurs as creatures of solely tropical climes. The Gobi Desert of Mongolia yielded a different kind of treasure. The fine red sandstone was a perfect medium for preserving not just skeletons, but entire scenes from the Mesozoic. A Protoceratops locked in its final struggle with a velociraptor, their bodies forever entwined, a nest of oviraptor eggs, with the parent fossilized in a brooding position, forever protecting the young that would never hatch. These were not just animals, they were moments, frozen in time, offering unparalleled glimpses into behavior, parenting, and the brutal reality of predator and prey. The desert dust, for all its barrenness, was a fertile ground for stories. New technologies allowed for revelations on a microscopic scale. In a lab, a scientist could take a fragment of bone no larger than a fingernail and, using synchrotron imaging, map the intricate network of blood vessels that once fed the living tissue. They could analyze the chemistry of the bone to determine an individual's diet, its migration patterns, and even the climate it experienced. A single tooth could reveal a lifetime of travel, its layers of enamel holding isotopic records of the water it drank, a biographical map written in minerals. The lost worlds were not just being rediscovered, they were being reanimated, their climates, ecologies, and the life stories of their inhabitants painstakingly reconstructed from the atomic-level evidence they left behind. The work was slow, meticulous, and often thankless, a stark contrast to the dramatic finds of the past. But the rewards were profound. With each carefully mapped dig site, each CT-scanned skull, and each chemically analyzed fragment, the lost world of the dinosaurs grew more vivid, more complex, and more real. They were no longer monsters of myth or static museum mounts, but dynamic animals that breathed, migrated, cared for their young, and fought for survival. The deserts, the badlands, and the frozen wastes had kept their secrets for millions of years, but now, grain by grain and bone by bone, they were finally giving them up, revealing a planet far more wonderful and strange than anyone had ever dreamed. The air within the great hall was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of old stone and polished wood, a sacred silence that stood in stark contrast to the world these bones had once thundered through. Under the vaulted ceilings and the soft artificial glow of track lighting, they stood reassembled, their skeletons a ghostly architecture of a lost age. Here, in the museum's hallowed space, the impossible span of deep time collapsed into a single breathless moment. A child, her face upturned and eyes wide, stood before the towering frame of a Tyrannosaurus rex, her small hand barely reaching the first toe bone of a creature that had once shaken continents. The past was no longer a chapter in a book, it was a presence, immense and silent, its hollow eyes gazing across the millennia into her own. The whole was a necropolis of giants, a poetic gathering of forms that had never met in life. A triceratops, its great frill a bony sunburst, faced the tyrannosaur in an eternal standoff that had never occurred, its three horns poised for a charge that would never come. Beyond them, the impossible, graceful arc of a diplodocus neck swept toward the ceiling, each vertebra a monument to scale, the entire animal a lesson in the sublime engineering of weight and lightness. The skeletons were not mere displays, they were reincarnations, their poses carefully chosen to suggest the dynamism of life. A stegosaurus caught mid-step, its tail slightly raised as if to swing its thagomizer, and an allosaurus crouched as if ready to spring from its pedestal. Light played upon the fossilized bone, highlighting the intricate sutures where skull plates had fused, the deep muscle scars on massive femurs, the delicate tracery of air sacs that had once lightened the vertebrae of the great sauropods. To walk among them was to engage in a form of time travel, where the mind could strip away the stone and clothe the frames in muscle and skin, in the vibrant colors now suggested by science. The silence was not empty, it was full. It was the silence of a forest after a rain, of a riverbank at dawn, the spaces between the bones humming with the memory of the flesh that had once animated them, the roars and bellows and the rustle of ferns that had long since faded from the air. In this temple of memory, the divide between then and now dissolved. The careful labels, the diagrams of muscle attachments, the maps of ancient continents, they were not barriers to wonder, but gateways. They allowed the visitor to stand not as a modern human looking backward, but as a temporary citizen of the Mesozoic, to imagine the heat of the sun on that rough hide, to feel the vibration of the herd moving through the earth, to understand the sheer living, breathing reality of these animals. They were not monsters, they were parents, hunters, survivors, each bone a word in a story of adaptation and existence that had lasted for hundreds of millions of years. The museum hall did not house death, it curated life. It was a space where the past felt urgently, achingly present, a reminder that the world is ancient and that we are merely its latest inhabitants, walking under the same stars that once shone down on these magnificent beings. As the visitors moved in, hushed reverence from one giant to the next, they participated in a quiet ritual of remembrance, connecting their own brief, brilliant spark of life to the long, thunderous narrative of the planet. The halls were a bridge across the abyss of extinction, a place where wonder was the only appropriate language, and the lost world felt, for a moment, not lost at all. For all the skeletons mounted in museum halls, for all the digital models and chemical analyses, the dinosaurs remain, in their essence, a profound and beautiful mystery. The fossil record is a book with most of its pages missing, a collection of tantalizing fragments that hint at a story we can never fully know. We have reconstructed their bones, speculated on their colors, and modeled their gaits, but the inner world of the dinosaur, the scope of its mind, the nuance of its behavior, the true cause of its final downfall, lingers just beyond our grasp, a ghost in the machine of deep time. The question of their intelligence is perhaps the most haunting. Endocasts of brain cases give us volume and shape, a map of the hardware, but not the software that ran upon it. Was the cunning of a dromaeosaur, with its potential for pack hunting, a sign of complex cooperative problem-solving, or merely sophisticated instinct, a pre-programmed set of behaviors as rigid as the gears of a clock? Could a triceratops recognize individual members of its herd? Did a mother sauropod feel something akin to grief if her calf was taken by a predator? The silence of the stone offers no answers, only the echo of our own curiosity, projecting our concepts of mind and emotion onto creatures that may have experienced the world in ways we cannot conceive. Even the mechanics of their most famous features are debated. The great sails of Spinosaurus and Oranosaurus, were they thermal regulators, fat humps, or dazzling display structures? The exact function of the stegosaur's plates remains a subject of lively contention. Were they for defense, for species recognition, or for flushing with blood to cool the animal or attract a mate? We can run computer simulations and study blood vessel impressions, but we cannot ask them. We are left to interpret the static evidence of structure without witnessing the dynamic reality of its use in a living, breathing world full of choices and pressures. The trigger for their extinction, while widely accepted to be an asteroid impact, is not the neat, simple end to the story it might seem. The world they inhabited was already under stress from monumental volcanic activity in the Deccan Traps, which had been altering the climate and poisoning the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands of years. Were the dinosaurs already in a slow decline, their ecosystems fraying at the edges, making them vulnerable to the final catastrophic blow? Or were they thriving, a robust and dynamic kingdom cut down in its prime by a random act of cosmic violence? The precise interplay between the asteroid's instant hellfire and the volcano's slow burn is a delicate calibration lost to time, a question of whether the reign of the giants was murdered or already ill, merely finished off by a stray bullet from the cosmos. And what of the sounds we can never hear? We can model the resonant chambers of a hadrosaur's crest and guess at the low frequencies it might have produced, but we cannot know the melody. Was there a dawn chorus in the Cretaceous, a symphony of dinosaur calls greeting the sun that would put any modern forest to shame? Did different species have distinct alarm calls for different predators? The trackways show herding and fleeing, but they cannot record the panicked cries that must have accompanied a predator's attack. The soundscape of the Mesozoic is a permanent silence, a layer of the past that is forever, heartbreakingly mute. These unanswered questions are not failures of science, but its engine. They are the blank spaces on the map that compel us to keep looking, to develop new technologies, to re-examine old fossils with fresh eyes. They are a reminder that the past is not a puzzle to be solved, but a vast and deep mystery to be explored with perpetual wonder. The dinosaurs, in their silence, continue to teach us, not just about their world, but about the limits of our own knowledge and the endless thrilling pursuit of understanding. They are gone, but the conversation with them has only just begun. Long after the last heartbeat faded, and the final roar fell silent, their world did not vanish, it transformed. The great bodies of the dinosaurs, buried in mud and sand, began the slow alchemical process of becoming stone. Flesh dissolved, carried away by water and time, while minerals seeped into the pores of bone, molecule by molecule, replacing organic matter with quartz and calcite. What remained was not a corpse, but an echo, a perfect mineral ghost of the living animal, locked in the very rock that had once been the soil beneath its feet. These fossils, scattered across the globe, became the ultimate legacy of the dinosaurs, not just their bones but the indelible mark they left on the imagination of a world yet to come. That legacy first took root in the human mind as myth and mystery. The massive, unfamiliar shapes weathering out of cliffs and riverbanks were woven into the creation stories of cultures across the world. They became the bones of giants, the remains of dragons, the physical proof of a primordial age of monsters that lived just beyond the edge of memory. They were things of power and fear, talismans that connected the people who found them to a deeper, more savage past. This was the first inspiration, the human need to explain the inexplicable, to populate the unknown with beings of scale and wonder, a tradition of storytelling ignited by a piece of stone that had once been a limb, a tooth, a life. With the birth of science, that legacy evolved into a relentless pursuit of knowledge. The bizarre bones ceased to be monsters and became puzzles, each fossil a piece of a grand planetary mystery. They drove rival naturalists to desperate expeditions in harsh lands, fueled a bone war that uncovered entire lost worlds, and eventually built the great museum halls where skeletons were resurrected into majestic, awe-inspiring mounts. They forced humanity to confront the sheer depth of time, to accept that our species was a recent arrival in a story that had been unfolding for hundreds of millions of years. The dinosaur fossil became the ultimate teacher of humility and wonder, a catalyst for the sciences of geology, paleontology, and evolutionary biology. In the modern era, their legacy expanded into the realms of art and technology. The skeletons inspired artists to paint the Mesozoic world in vivid color, to sculpt its inhabitants in dynamic poses, and eventually to use computers to bring them to life in films that captivated generations. The quest to understand them drove innovation, leading to CT scanners that could see through rock, microscopes that could detect ancient color, and software that could model their movement and biomechanics. They became a bridge between science and creativity, a subject that demanded both rigorous analysis and boundless imagination, proving that the past could be a powerful engine for future discovery. But perhaps their most profound legacy is the simplest. They teach us to look at the world with wonder. A child staring up at the towering skeleton of a T-Rex is not just learning about a prehistoric predator. They are being initiated into a sense of awe at the scale and diversity of life. They are learning that the world is ancient, that it has been home to creatures of breathtaking majesty and strangeness, and that our own time is but a single page in a very long book. The dinosaurs, in their extinction, achieved a form of immortality. They live on not as flesh and blood but as stone and story, as a permanent invitation to curiosity, a reminder that the Earth's greatest tales are written in the rock beneath our feet, waiting for anyone with the eyes to see and the wonder to understand. Time is the great sculptor, and life its most malleable clay. The story of the dinosaurs is but a single magnificent paragraph in the epic volume of Earth's history, a testament to the patient, relentless forces of evolution that can conjure giants from single cells and fill the skies with wonders. To trace their lineage is to embark on a journey through deep time, a scale so vast it defies human intuition, the 165 million years of their reign, a span in which continents drifted apart, seas rose and fell, and climates shifted from hothouse to icebox, stand as a humbling reminder of our own fleeting moment in the sun. They were the products of countless accidents and opportunities, of random mutations seized upon by natural selection, each adaptation a response to the eternal challenges of survival, each extinction an opening for new forms to blossom in the void. Their world was one of fragile, interconnected wonder, a complex tapestry, where the smallest fern and the largest sauropod were linked in a dance of energy and existence. The oxygen they breathed was the exhaust of ancient cyanobacteria. The plants they consumed had co-evolved with them over millennia, developing toxins and defenses that in turn shaped the evolution of ever more sophisticated methods of consumption. They were not isolated monarchs but integral threads in the web of life, their fates tied to the climate, the geology, and the minute unseen organisms that sustained the very air and soil. Their disappearance was not merely the end of a dynasty, but a rupture in that web, a catastrophic simplification that reset the clock of evolution and left the world achingly empty, a silent stage waiting for the next players. And yet from that emptiness arose new wonders. The tiny furry mammals that had scurried in the shadows of the giants seized their chance, diversifying into the forms that would eventually include us. The birds, those feathered descendants of theropods, carried the dinosaur legacy into every corner of the globe, their songs and flights a living continuation of the Mesozoic dream. The world recovered, as it always does, not by repeating the past but by inventing a new future. The dinosaurs teach us that extinction is not an end, but a transformation, a harsh creative force that clears the ground for new experiments in life, each iteration building upon the fossils of the last. The wonder lies not just in their immense size or fearsome appearance, but in their sheer improbability, that a random collision of molecules in a primordial sea could eventually lead to a creature as sublime as a soaring pterosaur or as powerful as a charging triceratops is the greatest mystery of all. It speaks to a universe pregnant with potential, where the laws of physics and chemistry can, given enough time, give rise to beauty, complexity, and consciousness. Their fossils are therefore more than bones, they are sacred artifacts, the physical evidence of a profound and fragile miracle, the miracle of life itself, persistent, adaptable, and endlessly creative against all odds. To ponder them is to touch the deep, eternal mysteries of existence, to stand in awe of the fragile, magnificent wonder of being on a planet that has known such glory, and to feel the solemn responsibility that comes with being its current, temporary stewards. The great silence that followed the thunder was not an emptiness, but a transformation. The bones once clothed in muscle and driven by fierce hot blood now rest as stone, their stories locked in layers of shale and sandstone, patiently waiting for the curious to listen. The world they knew of humid fern-choked air, of ground-shaking herds and piercing predator calls, is gone, erased by fire and ice and the slow, patient work of geological time. Yet their legacy endures, not as a ended chapter, but as a profound and lasting echo in the very fabric of our planet and the life that followed. To stand under the night sky now, away from the glow of human cities, is to share the same celestial canopy that once watched over the Cretaceous world. The same constellations that gleamed above the sails of Spinosaurus and the frills of Triceratops still turn in their ancient stately dance. The moon that pulled at the tides of their inland seas still casts its silver light on deserts that now conceal their bones. This cosmic continuity is a humbling reminder that our time here is brief, a single note in a symphony that has been playing for billions of years. The dinosaurs ruled for a span so vast it defies comprehension, their empire lasting 100 times longer than human existence thus far, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of life when given deep time to unfold. Their extinction was not a failure but a part of life's grand, often brutal rhythm. It was a clearing of the stage, a moment of profound loss that made space for new actors, the mammals, the birds, and eventually, us. In their vanishing they bestowed a gift upon the future, the opportunity for intelligence to emerge from the shadows, for curiosity to evolve, and for a species to arise that would one day piece together their story from fragments of stone. We are the beneficiaries of their silence, the inheritors of a world they helped shape, walking upon soil enriched by their decay, breathing an atmosphere they helped oxygenate. The awe they inspire is a quiet, peaceful kind, a contemplation of scale, both of time and of life. It is the awe of considering the immense, patient forces of evolution that could craft such perfect, terrifying, and beautiful forms. It is the awe of recognizing that every birdsong is a dinosaur's legacy, that every fossil is a message from a world we can never visit, but can endlessly imagine. They invite us not to fear, but to wonder, not to dwell on their end, but to marvel at their long, magnificent reign. So, under these same stars, we can find a sense of peace. The dinosaurs are not lost, they are translated. They live on in the flight of a hawk, the stride of an ostrich, and the wonder in a child's eyes gazing up at a museum skeleton. They are a permanent part of Earth's story, a reminder of the planet's capacity for both creation and destruction, and of the fragile, precious thread of life that connects all living things across the ages. Their silence is not an absence, but an invitation to listen, to learn and to cherish the vibrant living world we have been given, a world they helped make possible.